LoveLore Library. Chapter 1. Father. Father, Megshan heard a crisp and tender voice calling out to him. His fingers moved, and he suddenly grabbed onto something soft. His desire to live erupted, and he sat up abruptly. He opened his eyes, and was stunned. Where is this? Have I been rescued, or have I transmigrated? Megshan still remembered that he was fishing for king crabs on his own yacht. He had even lured the head chef of the Emperor Pavilion onto the yacht for this purpose. Unexpectedly, he didn't catch any crabs. A wave came, and he, who was sitting at the back of the yacht, was thrown into the sea. In his daze, he heard a woman scream and the sound of diving into the sea. When he woke up again, he was already in a European-style room, and he was holding the hand of a little silver-haired loli of about 4 or 5 years old. However, before Megshan could say anything, countless information suddenly flooded into his mind, and he instantly sealed off his perception of the outside world. This feeling was somewhat similar to the last moment of suffocation. Megshan was a somewhat famous rich second-generation heir in his previous life. However, he liked to call himself a gourmet, and had no interest in inheriting his family business. He preferred to taste the famous delicacies in the world, and then update his reviews of those delicacies on Weibo. Because of his sharp and vicious comments, and his rich behavior of sweeping away almost all the Michelin restaurants, he had amassed tens of millions of fans in 2 or 3 years. He felt that he was only writing reviews based on facts. Although he usually emphasized the shortcomings, and used slightly exaggerated words, he still received thousands of comments every day that cursed him to drown in the sea, and that he would be a chef for the rest of his life, and so on. For some reason, he still felt a little uncomfortable. Now that he thought about it, could it be that his falling into the sea this time was these people's dreams come true? God is too disrespectful, isn't it? Before he had time to think, his consciousness was already attracted by the information, and he saw another ups and downs of life. He was sure that he had transmigrated into the body of a downtrodden knight who could no longer pick up a heavy sword. Part of the information and emotions began to slowly fuse with him, and he couldn't reject it. This was a fantasy continent with giant dragons, demons, orcs, elves, dwarves, humans, and many other races. 100 years ago, all the races on the Norland continent signed a ceasefire agreement, and the war between species that had lasted for 1,000 years finally came to an end. All the races were living peacefully in their respective territories. However, after thousands of years of war, the hatred between the various races could not be resolved with just a piece of paper. There were constant local conflicts between each other, but generally, they were tacitly maintained at the borders of each territory, and there were no large-scale racial wars. The man that Megshan had transmigrated into was called Meg Alex. The Alex family was a family that had been glorious on the continent for hundreds of years. They had guarded the borders of the human empire for hundreds of years and had never let the orcs cross the border. However, 300 years ago, the Iron Castle was breached by the Orc Coalition army, which colluded with the demons. The Alex family, which was once glorious, was destroyed. Only a few small branches survived. When it came to Meg Alex, he was only a single descendant. However, ever since Meg Alex had enlisted in the army, he had been displaying extraordinary prowess. His powerful combat prowess and military prowess quickly earned him the recognition of his superiors, and he had earned countless accolades. In just a few years, he had become the youngest Griffin Knight, and the most sought-after young man in the Empire. He was hailed as the successor to the Empire's supreme commander, and the successor to the Alex family. If he hadn't encountered that Dark Knight 3 years ago, Meg Alex would have been destined to be a man standing at the top of the continent. But that night, the elves, demons, and human magic casters attacked him at the same time. They crippled his sword-wielding hands, broke his hamstrings, and threw a 1-year-old child to him. This was his child, the child that the elven princess had given birth to for him. Due to the conflict between the races, he was betrayed by his most trusted companion, and fell into the dust. His broken hands and feet barely healed under the treatment of an old friend, but he could no longer hold a sword. He changed his appearance, and brought his child to Chaos City. They established themselves here again, and the father and daughter depended on each other. His life was poor, and a cold caused this fallen knight to die with regrets. It also gave Megshan the opportunity to transmigrate. The end of a hero's life made Megshan feel a little emotional. However, he didn't feel the knight's obsession with revenge. He was more worried about his daughter's survival. "Don't worry about revenge, but I will take good care of the child," Megshan promised in his heart. All the information receded like the tide, and the last trace of obsession disappeared. He was still Megshan, but he had all of Meg Alex's memories and some of his emotions. "From now on, I will be called Meg," Megshan said in his heart. When he opened his eyes again, Meg's eyes had become clear, and his body was weak. "Father. What's wrong?" The little Loli's hand was still in his palm, and her little face was full of anxiety. A gentle look appeared in Meg's eyes as he looked at the little Loli kneeling beside the bed. Her long silver hair was draped over her shoulders, and her bright blue eyes were mesmerizing. Half of her pointy ears were covered, and her soft skin was inherited from the elven princess. She was wearing an old gray linen dress, but she was still as adorable as ever, and Meg couldn't help but want to kiss her. This was Meg Alex's daughter, Amy. She was now his daughter. Meg wasn't married in his previous life, and he didn't have any children. He didn't know how to get along with children, but after merging with the memories of his previous life, he felt as if he was looking at his own child as he looked at Amy, whose little face was full of worry. The urge to get close to her made him a little flustered, but because his parents were busy with business, he was looking forward to the feeling of being a father. I'm fine. Don't worry, Amy." Amy was what Meg usually called Amy. He clumsily reached out his hand to touch Amy's hair, and his voice was a little hoarse. Her soft hair was very comfortable to touch, and it made his heart tremble. This was his daughter. There was a feeling of being connected by blood. It was very strange. Yes. It's good that father is fine." Amy rubbed her hair against Meg's hand and squinted her eyes slightly like a cute little kitten. She pouted her little mouth and said coquettishly, "But father, I'm hungry. You can make something delicious for Meg." Meg felt as if his heart was about to melt. He even wanted to pluck the stars from the sky for her. However, when it came to cooking, he suddenly felt a headache coming on. He had eaten a lot of delicious food in his previous life, but when it came to cooking, he had never even touched a kitchen knife. Thinking back, he only knew how to cook a few dishes that were so crude that he was too lazy to touch them. He was just thinking about whether he should go out and eat something. However, at this moment, a neutral voice suddenly sounded in his mind: "God of Cookery Cultivation System activated." Meg was shocked. What the hell? God of Cookery Cultivation System? How did this thing get into his mind? Could it be related to this transmigration? The neutral voice continued: "In your previous life, the host wantonly destroyed the restaurant's reputation that had been accumulated over hundreds of years and accumulated too much resentment from the chefs. Therefore, the heavenly axiom introduced the God of Cookery Cultivation System. It will supervise the host to learn cooking in this world and grow into a god of cookery. In view of the host's low cooking talent, the system will issue missions from time to time to urge the host to improve. Completing a mission will result in a reward from the system. Failing a mission will result in a punishment from the system." Hearing the voice in his mind, Meg was stunned for a while before he came to his senses. Fuck. What was this? He had transmigrated to this world only because he had been too harsh on the restaurants in his previous life. So he was sent to this world to be a new person, and even created a god of cookery cultivation system for him to learn how to cook. He thought of the most common message he had received in his previous life: I hope you can be a chef in your next life. Chapter 2. Bro, all I did was give a few casual comments. Although my words were a bit harsh, and I even closed dozens of restaurants. But do you really have to create a system to force me to become a chef? Thinking about how he would have to learn how to cook under the supervision of a system, Meg felt like he was going to break down. If it was just some ordinary dishes, then so be it, but the system said that he would become the god of cookery. God of cookery. Are you fucking kidding me? Meg felt like cursing. Father, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Amy asked worriedly as she reached out to touch Meg's face. She felt that her father was a bit different today, but she couldn't tell what was different. Feeling the warm touch on his face, Meg came back to his senses. He tried to calm himself down and squeezed out a smile. After thinking for a while, he took out the last 2 copper coins he had and put them in Amy's hand. Amy, go buy 2 biscuits. We won't be cooking tonight. Really? Amy loves biscuits the most. Amy's face suddenly revealed a surprised smile. Holding the 2 copper coins in her hand, she climbed up from the bed and kissed Meg's face. She then jumped down from the bed with her short legs, put on her shoes, and ran out of the door. Meg watched as Amy disappeared through the door and felt an inexplicable heartache. Biscuits were coarse grain biscuits that cost 1 copper coin each. However, for the past 2 years, the father and daughter had relied on Meg Alex to barely survive by doing odd jobs in the guild. Meg would only buy biscuits for Amy during festivals. Amy was also very obedient and sensible. Although she wanted to eat biscuits, she never took the initiative to ask for them. However, where did the system run off to? Meg stood up with both hands on the bed. He dragged his straw sandals on the ground and walked to a shabby copper mirror by the wall to look at his appearance. Due to malnutrition and long-term exposure to the sun, his skin was a little yellow. His appearance was 70 to 80% similar to his appearance in his previous life, except that his long brown hair was curly and draped behind his head. His face was full of sideburns, making him look a little sloppy. This is a complete waste of a good foundation, Meg couldn't help but ridicule. Even going out would scare children. With such a cute little loli at home, he doesn't even know how to clean himself up. After that incident, his predecessor had almost given up on himself. If it weren't for Amy's existence, he might have chosen to end his glorious life on that night 3 years ago. The little fellow has suffered a lot with you, so let me make it up to him in the future. Meg clenched his fists, but he felt like he couldn't exert any strength. Meg couldn't exert any strength with his broken arms and legs. He felt like a cripple, and even clenching his fists was difficult. And now, the situation at home could only be described as a bare house. There was only 1 bed in the room, and the only thing on the bed was a small cloth blanket that Amy used to cover herself when she slept. Not to mention the god of cookery. If he spent the last 2 copper coins, he wouldn't even be able to eat tomorrow. It seemed like the key to solving this problem fell on the system. System has issued the first mission: own your own restaurant. The host only needs to provide the land for the restaurant, and the system will renovate the restaurant according to the style that the host chooses. The mission has a time limit of 3 days. There will be a reward after completion, and a punishment if you fail. Right at this moment, the system's neutral voice sounded again. Own a restaurant. Meg was stunned for a moment, but when he heard the system's words, he was overjoyed. He suddenly felt that the system wasn't so unreliable after all. Even though his predecessor had been living a miserable life, the first thing he had done after coming to Chaos City was to buy this 2-story building. Even though it was an old 2-story building, and it was located in the furthest corner of the Aiden Square, the entire building belonged to him. And although it was a bit out of the way, the first floor could be used as a storefront. There were people who wanted to rent it before, but they were all rejected by the stubborn predecessor. Otherwise, even a copper coin's worth of pancakes wouldn't have become a luxury item. Meg slowly went downstairs with his hands on the wall. The wooden floor creaked because of the age, and even a few stairs were broken. It was a completely dilapidated house. Meg finally went downstairs, panting heavily. His body was too weak. He could tear an orc apart with his bare hands in the past, but now he had to stop to rest after taking a few steps. Meg suddenly understood why he chose to give up on himself. If it were him, he wouldn't have the courage to continue living either. System, after completing the mission, will there be a reward for improving my body? Meg asked in his mind, unconsciously clenching his fists. Not now. The system's cold voice sounded. If there isn't now, does that mean there will be a reward in the future? Meg's eyes suddenly lit up. If he continued to live in this body, he wasn't sure how long he could last. But if the system could help him recover his body, even if he couldn't reach the level of the first night, he would be able to live a normal life. In his previous life, he had money, women, power. He had everything. He was born at a height that others couldn't reach in their lifetime. So, for a long time after he turned 30, he began to think about life. He wanted to know what he wanted, but couldn't find a goal. At that time, reviewing food and restaurants was one of his favorite things. He was even a little picky and addicted to using a sharp tongue. But it was only at that time that he was quick to speak, and when he looked at those reviews afterward, he only felt emptier. But now, it was different. He had a lovely daughter. Living at the bottom of society, whether it was to recover his body or to give his daughter a better life, learning how to cook and opening a restaurant, it would take a long time and effort. With his dream and goal suddenly clear, Meg felt like his heart suddenly began to beat again. The nobles were stamping their feet and lining up, the elves were eating skewers without caring about their manners, the dragons were holding a colander and sitting in front of a hot pot, and the demons were eating cute dumplings. Meg imagined this scene and suddenly felt it was more interesting. The space on the first floor was not small. Half of the wall in the middle was removed, and there was a space of about 80 square meters. There were some wood and other debris on the ground, and there was a simple dark kitchen at the back. Even if this space was empty and not rented out, he couldn't blame God if he died of poverty. Meg shook his head, but at least he had met the requirements of the first mission. He directly said in his heart, provide a piece of land for the restaurant. The system has detected that the property rights of this house belong to the host, and the geographical location meets the requirements of opening a restaurant. Mission completed, please choose the style of the restaurant. The system's voice sounded, and at the same time, a row of 3D pictures suddenly appeared in Meg's mind. China classical style, rural style, Western style, restaurant style. Anyway, as long as it was a style that was available in the market, Meg could find it in the pictures, and he was a little dazzled. Since it was the resentment of those chefs that brought me here, I must learn their dishes. Among them, Chinese restaurants must be the main ones, but I have been to many Western restaurants, and there are all kinds of internet-famous restaurants. I just don't know how many of them will appear in the future. Meg was not in a hurry to choose. After some serious analysis, Meg felt that he couldn't stick to a certain style. Otherwise, if he were to serve a plate of steak with knives and forks in an antique Chinese restaurant, he would definitely have been scolded to death by him in the past. It was simple and comfortable, and it would be best if it could accommodate more customers. He was already looking forward to the scene of the restaurant full of customers. That's it. Meg's eyes lit up when he saw a restaurant with a bit of classical European style. The overall color of the restaurant leaned towards brown, decorated with some exquisite patterns, and hung with European-style lights. The table was the simplest brown wooden rectangular table for 4 people, and there were matching wooden chairs without armrests. There was also a single long table in front of the counter, which could easily put down 16 tables. At first glance, he knew that it could accommodate many people. Behind the long counter was a semi-open kitchen. The transparent glass allowed people to see the outside, but the height of the glass was good enough to block the view of the stove. The overall style was simple and elegant, enough to accommodate any kind of cuisine. Even if one sat there eating skewers and bragging, there would be no sense of disharmony. Chapter 3. The system's voice rang out. The system only provides renovations for the restaurant, excluding the areas outside the restaurant. Meg habitually rubbed his chin with his right hand as he looked at the dilapidated staircase and the pitch-black second floor. He thought of the bed covered in straw and decided that he couldn't stay there for the night. He couldn't let his precious daughter suffer anymore. He had to improve his quality of life tonight. Moreover, he didn't feel much hostility from the system. The so-called punishment was more likely to supervise him to learn how to cook so that he could complete the God of Cookery mission as soon as possible. In that case. Meg's eyes darted around as he said in a nonchalant voice, "System, I don't think you're right. I'm providing this entire building for the restaurant, so of course you have to renovate the entire building. I can't accept the opening of a restaurant with a different style. Moreover, if the second floor isn't reinforced, it'll be troublesome if a brick falls and kills the customer. If it doesn't, then it'll be even more troublesome. Maybe I'll be killed by a guy who can't even be killed by a drill. Then what's the point of learning how to cook and becoming the God of Cookery? Do as you see fit." The system fell silent, as if it was thinking. After a while, the system's voice rang out again. "Due to the high risk level of the building, the system has analyzed and decided to rebuild the building and renovate it. Host, please decide on the renovation style." Meg was secretly delighted. Sure enough, things like the system could still be negotiated. If he was led by the nose by the system, then it would be boring. However, on the surface, he still appeared to be quite calm. The restaurant's renovation style had been decided, and the second floor's renovation style was similar to his house in his previous life. It was low-key, luxurious, and comfortable. There were 3 rooms on the second floor, 1 toilet, and 1 bathroom. He chose a light pink renovation style for Amy's room and confirmed it with the system. The system's voice rang out, "The renovation will take 30 seconds. Host, please leave the room. The 1-minute countdown will begin." 30 seconds was enough. Meg was stunned for a moment, but when he heard the 60-second countdown, he hurriedly and slowly moved to the door. He crossed the threshold with some difficulty and turned around to close the door. The sky outside was already dark. "Father, are you here to pick up Amy?" Amy's soft and cute voice came from behind him. Meg turned around and saw Amy holding 2 brownish-yellow pancakes in each hand. She was looking up at him, her long eyelashes fluttering. Her little face was full of joy and excitement. In the past, her father had never come out to pick her up, but today, he seemed to have specially come downstairs to pick her up at the door. "Yeah, I'm here to pick up Amy, and I'm going to perform a magic trick for her." Meg squatted down with a smile and pulled Amy into his arms, hugging her gently. "Magic?" Amy looked up at Meg in confusion, but her eyes soon lit up. "Is it magic? Can Father make a lot of delicious food?" "And, that's right. Father wants to create a beautiful house for Meg, as well as a beautiful restaurant. In the future, I will make a lot of delicious food for you every day," Meg said softly. She was indeed a little foodie. "Really?" Amy opened her mouth slightly, as if she couldn't believe it. "Close your eyes and count down from 30. Meg nodded with a smile. 30, 29. Amy obediently closed her eyes and counted. Meg looked at Amy with a gentle gaze and listened to her soft voice counting down. The ground shook slightly, and the occasional sound of things falling to the ground came from behind him, but he didn't turn around to look. The countdown of 30 passed in the blink of an eye. Amy opened her eyes, her little face full of anticipation. Next, let's take a look at our new home. Meg took the 2 pancakes from Amy's hands and stood up holding her little hand. He also turned around to look in the direction of the house with some anticipation. A beam of warm light shone from the door and fell on the 2 figures standing at the door, one big and one small. Wow! Amy's mouth was wide open. She stared blankly at the house that had suddenly changed its appearance. Under the light, it looked like a magnificent palace. Then she turned to look at Meg and exclaimed happily, "Father, did you really make this? It's as beautiful as a crystal palace. There are even glowing stones. Father is so awesome. And this will be our home from now on, and it will also be a restaurant." Meg nodded with a smile. Indeed, being admired by his little girl was better than anything else. It was still a 2-story house, but this time, it had changed from a shaky 2-story wooden house to a European-style 2-story villa. The side facing the square was a floor-to-ceiling window, and from outside, one could see the restaurant under the European-style crystal chandelier. It was comfortable and stylish. However, because of the previous shaking, it seemed to have caused a small commotion. Meg took Amy's hand and pushed the door in, saying, "Let's go home first. Father will tell you about those things later. And, Father is the best." Amy rubbed her head against Meg's hand and jumped through the door happily. Meg turned off the lights outside the door. Just as the 2 of them entered, a bearded dwarf staggered out of the house next door. He looked around drunkenly and muttered, "Which stupid troll came here to dance again? Damn you guys, can't you let me sleep?" After saying that, he walked back and slammed the door with a bang. "Father, is this really our home?" Amy stood at the door and looked at the splendid restaurant. She looked up at Meg, still in disbelief. She had never seen such a beautiful house. The floor was flat and smooth, and the chandelier was as beautiful as crystal. There were brand new tables and chairs neatly arranged, and there was even an exquisite cutlery box on the table. Further inside, there was a long counter that was taller than her. There was also a room behind the counter, but she could not see what was inside. Of course. Meg smiled and nodded. He waved his hand and said, "This is our new home. We can open a restaurant on the 1st floor, and the 2nd floor is where we live." "Great." Before Meg could finish speaking, Amy had already run out and ran around the restaurant with open arms. Then, she sat down at the innermost table and waved at Meg. "Father, let's sit here and eat the pancakes. I'm hungry." "Okay." Meg smiled. Sure enough, eating was the most important thing. The mission of owning a restaurant has been completed. Because the host requested to renovate the area outside the restaurant, the mission reward will be cancelled. The system has issued a new mission: learn the first dish, Yangzhou fried rice. The mission time is 3 days. After the host is ready, you can enter the test field for the god of cookery to begin the trial. The reward for this mission is physical fitness plus 0.5, and the penalty for failure is physical fitness minus 0.5. The system's voice sounded again. Meg suddenly stopped. A door suddenly appeared in his mind. There were 4 golden words on the door: Yangzhou fried rice. This should be the so-called test field for the god of cookery. Of course, what Meg cared more about was the reward for success mentioned by the system. The most urgent thing for him now was to improve his body. In his current state, he could not even hold a kitchen knife steadily, let alone cook. He did not expect the system to give him a mission reward to strengthen his body so quickly. He suddenly felt a little excited. Although he did not know how far the physical fitness plus 0.5 would go, the system should not cheat him. Wasn't it just Yangzhou fried rice? How difficult could a bowl of fried rice be? When he was in Yangzhou, he had tried a few authentic Yangzhou fried rice, but they all seemed to have been miserably criticized by him. But to be honest, the taste of the fried rice was very good. It was just that he did not feel good if he did not find fault with it. It was said that there was an old-time honored restaurant that closed for a period of time after being criticized by him. But this kind of thing happened too often, so he did not pay much attention to it. Father. Amy looked at Meg, who was standing there in a daze, with a little confusion. Coming. Meg hurriedly suppressed the impulse to open the door in his heart and sat opposite Amy. He handed one of the pancakes in his hand to Amy and said with a smile, "Come, try our Amy's favorite pancake first." Meg looked at the pancake carefully. It was about the size of an adult's palm and 1 centimeter thick. It should be made of corn, green beans, potatoes, and a bunch of coarse grains wrapped in flour and baked in a charcoal oven. It looked like a rough tile in his hand. Okay. Amy held the pancake in front of her with both hands and opened her small cherry mouth to take a bite, making a crunching sound. Then she chewed happily like a little hamster. She ate very sweetly and looked very cute. Is it really that good? Meg was a little skeptical, but watching Amy eat really made him hungry. He could not help but take a bite of the pancake and chewed a few times. Then he was stunned. Chapter 4. Meg turned on the faucet and gulped down a few mouthfuls of water. He leaned on the edge of the sink and exhaled. Only then did he feel alive again. His mouth was extremely dry without drinking any water, and he almost choked to death when the biscuit went down his throat. Even now, his throat still felt a little sore. If it was in his previous life, he would have written a 1,000-word denunciation to shut down the restaurant. Was this even for humans? Father, are you okay? Amy ran over and asked worriedly while tugging at his clothes. Yes, Father is fine. I just choked a little. Meg quickly lowered his head to look at Amy. He reached out and touched her hair, and a smile appeared on his face again. This feeling of being remembered and relied on made his heart feel warm, and his malice towards the biscuit lessened a lot. He was now just an ordinary father, and he didn't want to do the things that happened in his previous life again. He didn't want to transmigrate a second time. Father, you have to eat slowly. Although the biscuit is delicious, you can't rush it. You have to bite it bit by bit so you won't choke. Amy breathed a sigh of relief, and then she lectured Meg with a stern face. Yes, Amy is right. Meg looked into Amy's eyes and nodded seriously. Only then did the little girl return to her seat with satisfaction. Meg wasn't in a hurry to go out. Instead, he looked around the kitchen. The layout of the kitchen was long and about 10 square meters. It could be considered spacious. There were 4 built-in gas stoves on the stove, a silver side suction hood, and a large refrigerator with a cross-shaped door. This was a very professional and modern kitchen, but most of the areas were still empty. There was only a wide Chinese kitchen knife hanging on the knife rack. There were no pots, bowls, ladles, or basins. System, did you forget to put in the electrical appliances and kitchen utensils when you were renovating? The refrigerator is also empty. Meg closed the empty refrigerator. His idea of cooking something to eat was also dashed. The host doesn't have the authority to use those electrical appliances yet. They will be unlocked after the completion of the mission. At this stage, only the ingredients needed in the recipes that the host has learned are provided, and the host needs to purchase them. The voice of the system sounded. In order for me to learn how to cook, the system really put in a lot of effort. Meg was stunned and a little helpless. It seemed that there was no other way to make something to eat today. The system said that in the future, the ingredients needed to be purchased. Would the system directly provide the ingredients needed? After walking around the kitchen and making sure that there was nothing to eat, he had to pour 2 bowls of water and carry them out. It seemed that it was necessary to complete the mission as soon as possible. Or else, he had a gold mountain of gold. Also, after eating the tasteless pancake, he was looking forward to the Yangzhou fried rice very much. Whether it was to let Amy taste the food from Earth, or to conquer the whole world with a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, it was both interesting. Meg went through the memories of his predecessor again. Because of the 1,000-year racial war in this world, the style of human cuisine was a bit similar to British cuisine. The cooking method was simple and crude. Other than boiling, there was also roasting. There was no seasoning when cooking, and when eating, they would sprinkle some salt and pepper according to their personal taste. The main purpose was to have a balanced diet. After all, there were not so many conditions to pay attention to during the war. Although after 100 years of peace, food had developed to a certain extent, but the chef's thinking was seriously rigid. Even if they tried to improve, the dishes were still simple, and there were not many refreshing cooking methods and dishes. Humans, who loved to study food, were like this, not to mention other races. The elves mostly took their food from nature, mainly wild fruits. The dwarves ate more casually, eating as long as it was cooked. As for the demons and orcs, they would even eat their prey raw. This is like a piece of virgin land, waiting for me to reclaim it. Meg curled his lips and looked at Amy, who was holding and eating the pancake with both hands, with a gentle smile on his face. He was not interested in spreading the great ideal of food culture, but he wanted his daughter to eat real food and live a comfortable life. Thinking about it this way, learning to cook was not something unacceptable. Because he was really hungry, Meg could only soak the pancake in the water and eat it after it softened. He could barely swallow it. Amy's teeth were very good, and the pancake made a crunching sound as she chewed. After a while, she finished eating. She picked up the bowl with both hands, drank a big mouthful of water, and burped contentedly. Looking at Meg, who was still using chopsticks to pick at the pancake in the bowl, she smiled and said, "Father, isn't the pancake super delicious?" Meg shook his head, reached out and scratched Amy's pink little nose, and said with a smile, "No, this can only be regarded as something that can barely satisfy hunger. Amy, in the future, I will cook a table of Manchuhan imperial feast for you. Only you can eat until you are full." Manchuhan imperial feast. Is it really better than pancakes? Amy's eyes completely lit up, but looking at Meg, her little face showed a bit of hesitation. The food that father made before tasted so strange. Could he really make a dish that was 100 times better than pancakes? Of course it's true, and the Manchuhan imperial feast is not just one dish, but a big banquet made up of 108 delicacies from all over the world. It can be eaten continuously for 3 days. Meg nodded seriously. Of course, he could guess the little girl's thoughts. In her mind, pancakes were the most delicious thing. His predecessor's cooking skills were really not that good, and were on par with his current cooking skills. He probably left a psychological shadow on the little girl. 108 delicacies from all over the world. Amy tapped her fingers, and her little head tried hard to imagine the scene of a table full of food that was better than pancakes, and could be eaten continuously for 3 days. Her eyes became brighter and brighter, and a happy smile appeared on her face. She jumped down from the chair, looked at Meg, and shouted happily, "Yay! Amy wants to eat the Manchuhan imperial feast. Father, make a Manchuhan imperial feast for Amy. Amy wants to eat now." Looking at Amy's expectant eyes, Meg suddenly felt a little embarrassed. He didn't even know how to make a plate of Yangzhou fried rice now. However, he had the master chef cultivation system, so a Manchuhan imperial feast would be a piece of cake for him. But looking at the little girl's expression of wanting to eat now, it seemed that he had bragged a little too early. Of course father wants to cook for Amy, but our restaurant hasn't opened yet, and there are no ingredients in the kitchen, so we can't make so many delicious dishes, Meg said apologetically as he reached out to touch Amy's head. Is that so? Amy was a little disappointed, but she quickly raised her head, grabbed Meg's big hand with her little hand, patted the back of his hand gently, and comforted him. It's okay, father. Amy thinks that the food used to be very delicious. When Amy grows up, I can make money, and then I'll buy a lot of delicious food for father, and let father make a Manchuhan imperial feast. Looking at the serious expression on Amy's little face, Meg suddenly felt a little sour in his nose. He sniffed, shook his head with a smile, and said, "Father is not the same as before. Of course, the matter of making money to support the family will be left to me. I will definitely keep my promise to make a Manchuhan imperial feast. This is the agreement between us, and also my promise." After saying that, he gave Amy a thumbs up. Chapter 5. Meg took Amy's hand and said with a smile, "Let's go." Amy was yawning just now. "Let's go upstairs and sleep." "Amy isn't sleepy yet. I can help father pack up." Yawning, Amy shook her head and said, "I'll pack up later. You can't fall asleep here. Father can't carry you now." Meg took Amy's little hand and felt a little disappointed. She was such a cute daughter, but he couldn't give her a princess carry, let alone lift her up. No, he had to recover as soon as possible. Meg made up his mind. The stairs were at the other end of the kitchen. There was a small door that separated the dining room from the living area, which suited Meg very well. The little girl had been running up and down the stairs while he was unconscious. She even went to invite someone to check on him. After eating, she said she wasn't sleepy, but after climbing the stairs, her eyes were about to close. Meg took her into the master bedroom. Next to the big bed, there was a pink children's bed with railings. The small bed had a small quilt and a small pillow. There was also a small staircase that could be climbed up. Amy's eyes lit up when she saw such a beautiful room and small bed. However, she was too sleepy. She took off her shoes and climbed onto the small bed. Resting her head on the warm and comfortable pillow, she held Meg's fingers tightly and said happily, "Father is so awesome. The bed is so soft and comfortable. Amy likes it so much. There's also the Manchuhan imperial feast. It must be delicious. Well, when you wake up tomorrow morning, you'll be able to eat father's breakfast made with love. Go to sleep," Meg said with a smile. "The breakfast made with love must be delicious," Amy murmured. She closed her eyes and fell asleep in a short while. Meg stood by the bed and looked at Amy, who was sleeping soundly. He reached out to push the hair that had fallen on her face to the side and pulled his other hand back to cover her with the quilt. "Don't worry, Daddy will definitely let you eat the Manchuhan imperial feast," Meg said in his heart as he bent down and gently kissed Amy's hair. Meg sat on the edge of the big bed, closed his eyes, and looked at the door in his mind. When he was thinking about how to open it, a little person that looked exactly like him appeared in his mind. It was like his body, completely under his control. After hesitating for a while, he reached out and pushed open the door with the words "Yangzhou fried rice" written on it. A white light flashed before Meg's eyes, and he closed them reflexively. When he opened them again, all of his consciousness had already been absorbed into the little person's body. The door behind him had disappeared, and he was standing in a rectangular kitchen that was identical to the kitchen on the first floor, so they corresponded perfectly according to the proportions. This is good. After going out, it saves me the time to familiarize myself with the kitchen." Meg's eyes lit up, but when he lifted his leg, he was stunned. His body, which had been completely powerless before, was now able to move normally. He couldn't help but jump twice. Although he still felt a little weak, it was much better than his previous state of being a cripple. "System, this is..." Meg shouted excitedly. Could it be that the system was kind enough to restore his body? The host's current physical condition is the condition after physical fitness plus 0.5. Please work hard to complete the mission. A strong body is waiting for you, the system's voice sounded. So that's how it is. Meg looked at the physical fitness comparison table in his mind. A normal human's physical fitness was 2. After Meg's broken arm and leg were reattached, his physical fitness was 1. He was in a semi-crippled state. His current physical fitness was 1.5. Although he couldn't pick up a heavy sword, it was enough to hold a kitchen knife. Moreover, the upper limit of the human body in this world was much higher than on Earth. For example, when a person's physical fitness reached 4, he could fight with an ordinary orc. When it reached 10, he could even beat a forest troll down with one punch. Meg Alex's physical fitness should have reached around 8. He was an extremely powerful existence among humans. Welcome to the test field for the god of cookery. The system will provide you with a serving of authentic Yangzhou fried rice. Only when the host's Yangzhou fried rice is certified by the system, you can leave the test field. The standard is all the requirements that the host mentioned when he reviewed the Yangzhou fried rice. The system's voice sounded again. System, I think I misheard. What is the standard you mentioned? Meg asked tentatively. All the requirements that the host mentioned when he reviewed the Yangzhou fried rice, the system replied emotionlessly. I think the standard of Yangzhou fried rice announced by the officials is quite good. Why don't we follow it? Meg tried to negotiate. The standard cannot be changed. Please complete the mission as soon as possible, the system refused flatly. Then what about the standard of other dishes in the future? Meg was a little panicked. The standard will be based on the host's previous review. WQNMLGB. Meg's heart was breaking down. He had thought that the system didn't have any bad intentions and could be used as an auxiliary system. Now, it seemed that he was still too naive. Using the original requirements as the standard was absolutely full of evil intentions. Thinking of his nitpicky and poisonous requirements, even if he was not enough to express his feelings now that he was the one who made the request. Damn it, he was digging his own grave. Even those Yangzhou fried rice masters probably couldn't make that kind of Yangzhou fried rice. Sure enough, I can't be too optimistic. This is a system that the Heavenly Tao created to appease those chefs. But now that I'm here, I can't leave without completing the mission. Meg looked at the glittering experience bag in his mind and took a deep breath to calm himself down. Since he had no choice, he might as well face it head-on. He had promised to make a breakfast of love for Amy. Thinking of how happy Amy would be when she ate the Yangzhou fried rice, Meg was also full of expectation. Even his eyes became firm. Meg tried to touch the glittering experience bag in his mind with his mind. A stream of experience about making Yangzhou fried rice was poured into his mind. From the choice of ingredients to the processing of ingredients to the process of making the fried rice, everything was perfectly integrated into his mind, as if he had already known how to do it. So simple. Meg was completely stunned. He thought the system would give him a hard time, but he didn't expect it to give him such a big surprise. It was as if he had inherited the inheritance of a Yangzhou fried rice master. He felt that as long as he followed the method in his mind, he would be able to make a bowl of high-quality Yangzhou fried rice that looked, smelled, and tasted good. It turned him from a novice chef to a veteran, which was simply cheating. After sorting out the things in his mind, Meg confidently walked to the fridge and opened it. There were all kinds of ingredients in it, including rice, tree mushrooms, ham, winter bamboo shoots, prawns, green peas, eggs, millet, and scallions. Everything he needed was available. First, cook, then process the ingredients, and then cook the rice. The steps in Meg's mind were very clear. Looking at the ingredients in the fridge, his eyes suddenly lit up. He reached out and grabbed a handful of rice. It was smooth and delicate, with a bluish-white color and full grains. Under the light, it was crystal clear. It was much better than the Thai rice he usually ate, and a sweet fragrance came to his face. Looking at the prawns in the pond, he found that their translucent bodies were actually covered with light purple lines, which were rarely seen. They swam happily, looking full of vitality and wildness. The winter bamboo shoots were still stained with some black soil, and the salt frost on the ham had not been removed. The gray mushrooms should be some kind of tree mushrooms, and the eggs were bigger than ordinary eggs, with a yellowish hue. There was still some dew on the tender green scallions. As a foodie who had eaten at almost all the restaurants with Michelin stars, Mag could tell that these ingredients were definitely top-notch, but he wasn't sure how good they were. However, since these were for him to practice his cooking skills, he naturally wouldn't stand on ceremony. He began to wash the rice and cook. With such a comprehensive experience, Meg originally thought that it would not be difficult to make a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. But when he really started to process the ingredients, he found that everything was not as simple as he had imagined. Although he was very clear on how to cut the rice, when he really held the ingredients and started to cut them, he found that the movements of his hands could not meet the requirements and standards in his mind. In order to make the taste of the fried rice more delicate, every side ingredient had to be cut into the same size as the rice grains. This required very high cutting skills, and was even more of a challenge for Meg. Just slicing the ingredients evenly was not enough, and he could only repeat it over and over again. When the time on the wall reached the 100th day, Jiang Hong was putting the fried rice in the pot into a plate with a spoon. He put the pot down and turned off the fire, with a confident smile on his face. "System, it should be done this time, right?" The Yangzhou fried rice, which had just come out of the wok, was perfectly wrapped in a layer of golden eggs, green peas, white prawns, gray tree mushrooms, red ham. All kinds of ingredients of different colors were perfectly blended into a plate. The colors were not messy at all, but instead made people feel that it was bright and harmonious. A small handful of chopped green onions was sprinkled on top of the plate, which was the icing on the cake. The aroma of all kinds of ingredients mixed together rushed to Meg's face, making his throat move uncontrollably. The system was silent for a while, and then said, according to the requirements set by the host before, 1. The rice granules are clear, and each grain is perfectly wrapped around the egg. Achieved. 2. The color is bright and harmonious, and it is appetizing. Achieved. 3. The texture is delicate, the taste is delicious, the hardness is moderate, fragrant, moist, and refreshing. Achieved. 4. The aroma is attractive, and it has a certain degree of recognition. Achieved. 4 requirements have been met at the same time. Congratulations to the host for learning the authentic Yangzhou fried rice. Mission completed, physical fitness +0. 5 reward. At the same time, the right to purchase the ingredients needed for Yangzhou fried rice and the right to use the corresponding kitchen utensils have been unlocked. Meg clenched his fists, and a sense of accomplishment arose spontaneously. Looking at the plate of Yangzhou fried rice in front of him, he actually felt like crying. He didn't know when was the last time he worked so hard to accomplish something. Sure enough, the feeling of achieving a goal was the most comfortable and carefree feeling. Of course, what made him most excited was that he could finally make a plate of Yangzhou fried rice for Amy with his own hands. Thinking of the cute appearance of the little girl when she ate, his heart was filled with anticipation. System, can I try this plate of Yangzhou fried rice? Looking at the plate of Yangzhou fried rice, Meg, who had not felt hungry since he entered the test field for the god of cookery, suddenly felt a little hungry. The host will automatically leave the test field for the god of cookery after 5 minutes, the system said. 5 minutes, that's enough. Meg hurriedly took a spoon from the cupboard at the side, scooped a spoonful of fried rice from the plate, and put it into his mouth. After chewing a few times, his eyes suddenly lit up. The fragrance of chopped green onions and eggs assailed his nostrils. The grain-sized shrimp and ham tasted so delicate. The egg-wrapped rice was full of sweetness after being chewed carefully. The taste of various ingredients melted in his mouth, constantly assaulting his taste buds. Even after swallowing, the fragrance still filled his mouth. This taste, it's simply amazing. For the first time, he realized that Yangzhou fried rice could be so delicious. How could one spoonful be enough? Meg almost swept up the whole bowl of fried rice. When he licked back the last grain of rice wrapped in eggs on his lips, he was satisfied and had the urge to have another bowl. It was simply too tempting. Amy will definitely like this Yangzhou fried rice. As for the foodies on the Noah continent, I'm sure no one can resist this taste. Putting down the spoon, Meg recalled the wonderful experience brought by this bowl of Yangzhou fried rice. His depressed mood, which had been caused by repeating the same thing for 100 days, was suddenly refreshed. 5 minutes passed quickly. Jiang Hong only saw a white light flash in front of his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on the big bed. He suddenly sat up and turned his head to look at Amy, who was sleeping soundly on the small pink bed beside him. Only then did the dreamy feeling in his heart slowly settle down. Then, he looked at his hands with some surprise and clenched his fists. It was the same feeling as when he was in the test field for the god of cookery. His body, which could not even clench his fists, had been greatly improved. Normal activities and cooking were no longer a problem. The system is really quite reliable. Meg got up from the bed, stretched his arms and legs, and glanced at the alarm clock on the bedside table. It was already 5 o'clock in the morning. Looking down at his dirty clothes, he walked a few steps to the wardrobe and opened it. In the end, there was only a chef's suit and a black lowly dress. The chef's suit was made of a white shirt with 2 rows of exquisite black buttons, black casual pants, a black and white vertical apron, a pair of white tights, a pair of black flats, and a pair of small white shoes. It was clean and simple. Meg took the clothes into the bathroom and took a careful shower. Then, he took a pair of scissors and cut his wild long brown curly hair into neat short hair. After cutting his beard with scissors, he shaved it clean with a razor, leaving only 2 faint handlebar mustaches on his upper lip. Sure enough, this is the right way to open. Meg reached out and touched his chiseled face. Looking at his completely different appearance in the mirror, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. After tidying up, he had successfully transformed from a sloppy homeless man into an elegant young uncle. This time, he was 80% similar to his previous life. The only difference was his body shape. Now, he looked too weak with his skin and bones. Next, he should eat a full meal and then do more muscle-building exercises. After finishing his narcissism, Meg changed into the chef's suit. After tidying up neatly, his appearance in the mirror looked somewhat like a chef. Chapter 7. After cleaning up the bathroom, Meg took a look at Amy, who was still sleeping. He put the dress, tights, and white shoes beside the bed and imagined how cute the little girl would look in this dress. He couldn't help but smile. He took a small set of toiletries and quietly went downstairs. Meg couldn't be more familiar with this kitchen. On the stove, which didn't have kitchen utensils last night, all the utensils needed to make Yangzhou fried rice were now ready. He opened the refrigerator and saw that all kinds of ingredients were available. In the glass pool beside the refrigerator, prawns were swimming happily. It's time to show my real cooking skills and make a lovely breakfast for Amy. Meg washed his hands and began to wash the rice. Father. Not long after, in the room on the second floor, Amy turned over in a daze but didn't feel the familiar face. She opened her eyes in a daze and sat up. Looking at the strange room for a while, she remembered that this was the new room that her father made last night, but she didn't know where he was on the big bed. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. She held the small railing and was about to get up. But as soon as she got up, her eyes were attracted by the black dress beside the bed. Her eyes suddenly lit up. She took the dress in surprise and rubbed it on her face. It felt soft and smooth. She happily murmured, "This must be the dress that Father made for me. It's so beautiful. Amy likes it so much." Meg didn't know that the little one had woken up. He cooked the rice. This rice cooker was very efficient, and the rice was cooked very quickly. Although the rice was freshly cooked, the grains were clear and crystal clear, and the aroma was delightful. "What kind of rice is this? Even if it's white rice, I think I can eat 2 big bowls." Meg couldn't help but murmur. And the prawns, even if they were casually boiled in water, the taste would probably be extremely delicious. Meg took all kinds of ingredients and washed them. The moment he held the knife, his expression became very serious. This was the experience he had gained in the God of Cooking space. Cooking was something that required wholehearted devotion. This was the attitude of a chef. A Chinese kitchen knife was nimbly rotating in Meg's hand. Whether it was the crispy winter bamboo shoots or the hard-shell prawns, they all became the spare ingredients. After tens of thousands of knife practice, his knife skills had become very skillful. Of course, no chef could use these things to practice knife skills as extravagantly as he did. The oil was poured into the wok, and the various ingredients were put into the wok in an orderly manner. A rich aroma filled the kitchen and drifted out through the door. It leisurely drifted up the stairs with the door left open, and drifted into the room with a small crack in the door. Amy giggled as she sat on the bed, trying her best to change into a new dress. It was the first time she had worn such a beautiful dress. It was so comfortable, and it clung to her body softly. It was as if she was wearing a cloud. It was light, but it felt very warm. Then Amy smelled the aroma. Her big blue eyes, which were still a little sleepy, immediately lit up. She sniffed hard and said, "It smells so good. Could it be that Father is cooking something delicious?" Ignoring the pair of long socks in her eyes, Amy quickly climbed down the ladder from the bed, put on her small white shoes, and ran toward the door with her short legs. When she opened the door, the aroma became even stronger. Amy swallowed her saliva, and her little stomach couldn't help but growl. She had never smelled this kind of aroma before. Even the roast goose she smelled at the entrance of the roast goose shop next to the square couldn't compare to half of this aroma. Her footsteps became lighter as she went downstairs. She couldn't wait to fly into the kitchen and see what delicious food her father was cooking. "It smells so good. What is Father cooking?" Before Amy could finish her sentence, she saw Meg's back in a simple white and black chef's suit. His long curly hair and beard had been cut off. Her words came to an abrupt halt as her blue eyes widened in disbelief. Was this person really her father? Meg is already awake. When he heard the sound, he turned his head to look at the door in surprise. The little one had already changed into a black lowly dress. It was a Gothic-style dress, paired with white shoes with little pink butterflies. After sleeping for a while, a strand of hair stood up on her soft silver hair. She stood at the door with her mouth slightly open, looking very adorable. It seemed that she was shocked by his current appearance. He smiled and said, "What's wrong? You can't recognize your father after sleeping for a while." "It's really father." Amy blinked and exclaimed in surprise. His long curly hair had become a nicer short hairstyle, and his prickly beard was gone. His clothes had become clean and nice, and the smile on his face was bright and comfortable. More importantly, her father looked very tall today. He was like a giant who suddenly stood up, and his straight body was as tall as a tree. Father seems to have grown taller today. He's as tall as a tree, and he's so handsome. He's so good-looking. Amy came over happily. "Have I grown taller?" Meg lowered his head to take a look. It was probably because his originally stooped body had straightened up, and he had also changed into well-fitting clothes. That was why he looked taller. Of course, becoming handsome was something to be happy about. Sure enough, little girls still liked fresh-looking uncles. The little one's gaze was quickly attracted by the pot that Meg was stir-frying. She stood on her tiptoes and looked around. Full of curiosity, she asked, "But father, what's in the pot? Why does it smell so good? It smells even better than roast goose." "Amy is hungry. This is Yangzhou fried rice. This is our breakfast today. There's a small pink toothbrush and a tooth cup over there. Amy can come and have breakfast after brushing her teeth and washing her face. Is that okay?" Meg said with a smile, trying to make his voice as gentle as possible. In his previous life, he was somewhat aloof and never smiled when talking to others. Now, he was trying hard to adapt to the role of a kind father. He wanted to give Amy the warmth of the world. "Okay." Amy nodded obediently. She took a few more glances at the pot before reluctantly walking to the side to pick up the toothbrush and small cup. Under Meg's guidance, she began to brush her teeth for the first time. Meg carefully stir-fried the rice. He turned off the heat and took it out of the pot. A bowl of bright-colored Yangzhou fried rice was ready. "Wow, what a beautiful fried rice. Father is so awesome." Amy had just finished brushing her teeth and ran over. Looking at the Yangzhou fried rice that was a mixture of different colors, her eyes lit up and she praised seriously. "Yes, I think so too." Meg nodded, unable to hide the smile on his face. He was full of a sense of accomplishment. Amy leaned forward and sniffed. She couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Looking up at Meg, she pouted and said coquettishly, "It smells so good. Father, Amy wants to eat Yangzhou fried rice. It's all yours." Looking at the little girl's coquettish look, Meg's heart almost melted. There was a voice shouting in his heart, but he held it back. He reached out to wipe the foam from the corner of the little girl's mouth and shook his head. "Not now. In the future, you have to wash your hands before eating. Then father, please hurry up." Amy took Meg's hand and walked toward the sink. Meg raised his eyebrows. Something seemed to be wrong. He was actually being despised by the little girl. After the little girl washed her hands, Meg carried the plate of Yangzhou fried rice to the table where they had eaten yesterday. Amy was already sitting in her seat, holding a small spoon in her hand. She had been staring at the plate of fried rice in Meg's hand with expectant eyes ever since he came out. Chapter 8. The fried rice that had just come out of the pot was still steaming, and the aroma of eggs mixed with spring onions wafted over. Amy couldn't help but take a deep breath, her eyes shining as she looked at the fried rice in front of her. The rice grains were wrapped in golden eggs, as if they were glowing. Not only were there golden eggs, but there were also green, red, white, all kinds of colors mixed together. She couldn't help but swallow her saliva, looked up at Meg, and asked curiously, "Father, did you pick a rainbow and fry it?" "Aw." Meg, who had just sat down opposite her, was stunned for a moment. Looking at the colorful fried rice on the plate, it really did look like a fried rainbow. Childlike innocence is indeed the most interesting thing. He nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, this is rainbow fried rice. Amy, try it quickly." Amy shook her head, scooped up a big spoonful of fried rice, and handed it to Meg with some effort. "No, I want Father to take a bite first." "Meg, eat first. Father isn't hungry. I'll make another one later." Meg shook his head with a smile. "No, Father woke up so early to make breakfast for Amy. You must be hungrier than Amy." Amy pouted. The spoon was in the air, and because she didn't use enough strength, it was shaking a little, but she had no intention of taking it back. "Okay, then I'll take a bite first." Meg smiled as he ate the spoonful of rice on the spoon. His heart was filled with warmth as he swallowed the fragrant fried rice. The little one had already swallowed her saliva several times, but she still insisted that he eat the first spoonful of rice. This feeling of being cared for was really good. "Then Amy will start eating." Amy happily took back the spoon and scooped up another spoonful of fried rice. Looking at the rice with a serious expression, she said, "Rainbow, sorry, I'm going to eat you." Meg couldn't help but smile. The little girl's mind was really simple. He rested his chin on one hand and looked at Amy expectantly. He was actually a little nervous. Although he felt that this Yangzhou fried rice was very delicious, it was, after all, a dish from Earth, which was completely different from the cooking style of this world. He didn't know if Amy would like it or if she could get used to it. As soon as Amy put the fried rice into her mouth, her eyes lit up, and her pointy ears, which were half covered by her silver hair, twitched. The soft rice wrapped in the tender egg, the tender shrimp, the salty ham, the sweet and tender tree mushrooms, and the crisp winter bamboo shoots were all mixed together perfectly in this mouthful of fried rice. The texture was so delicate, and the rich and sweet taste melted in her mouth. It was so delicious that she didn't know how to describe it. Compared to this fried rice, the pancakes that were originally number one in her heart were like stones. They were not worth mentioning. She probably wouldn't want to eat pancakes in the future. Chapter 9. "Father, what's wrong with you?" Amy asked in confusion as she looked at Meg, who was standing at the table with a plate in his hand. "Oh, nothing. Amy, have a glass of water and play in the restaurant for a while. Father will cook the fried rice." Meg quickly shook his head with a smile. He moved the glass of water in front of Amy and walked quickly to the kitchen. What a beautiful crystal glass. Amy held the transparent glass happily. She leaned on the table and looked around, reluctant to drink the water inside. All the ingredients in the kitchen are provided by the system's farms, fisheries, and ranches all over the continent. They are sold to the host at the price of their origin. There is no transportation fee. The price is absolutely fair and honest. As soon as Meg walked into the kitchen, the system's calm voice sounded again. "Selling 1 green bean for 1 copper coin, and you're still being honest." Meg pursed his lips. If he wasn't worried that he would be maliciously punished if he angered the system, his sharp-tongued soul would have started to burn in his heart. The currency system of the Noah continent was slowly perfected in the past 100 years. During the racial war, most transactions were done through barter. After the peace treaty was signed, commerce developed, and currency reappeared. After a series of catfights and struggles, the currency issued by the Roth Empire became the common currency of the continent because the supply was sufficient, the exchange rate was appropriate, the issuance was stable, and it was not easy to depreciate. The lowest level of currency was copper coins. Meg recalled that in Chaos City, the purchasing power of 1 copper coin was about the same as 1 yuan. 10 copper coins could be exchanged for 1 silver coin, 10 silver coins for 1 gold coin, and 10 gold coins for 1 dragon coin. If it was in his previous life, a bowl of Yangzhou fried rice that cost 296 yuan was not a big deal. But now, he was the owner of this restaurant. Yangzhou fried rice, which cost 296 copper coins per serving, was not going to be sold for 500 copper coins per serving. He would probably be beaten to death on the spot by angry customers. After all, in Chaos City, there were all kinds of races. These green beans are grown in an uninhabited plain in the hinterland of the Twilight Forest in the Beastman's territory. Every day, the sun shines for up to 16 hours. Each green bean plant only produces 100 green beans, and the best 10 of them are sold. They taste sweet and nutritious. This prawn is a purple-striped prawn unique to the Soro archipelago in the Staros Sea to the northeast of the Roth Empire. The water conditions in the nearby sea areas are complicated, and sea demons roam about. Humans haven't caught them yet, so the annual production is less than 100,000. The prawn meat is very delicious. This rice is produced in the deep plains of the Wind Forest in the territory of the elves. It is grown with the underground branch of the Spring of Life, without any artificial pesticides or fertilizers. The yield per moo is no more than 300 caddies. Meg's jaw dropped as he listened to the names of all sorts of places from the system's mouth, as well as all sorts of strange breeding and planting methods. Planting green beans in the territory of an extremely territorial race like the Beastmen was one thing, but there was also the famous Dead Sea near the Soro archipelago. It was about the same as the Bermuda archipelago on Earth. It was said that even giant dragons would get lost if they flew in there. Yet, the system was actually raising prawns there. The spring of life of the elves was their holy spring, and the system was actually using it for farming. Although it was only one of the underground branches, it was probably something that even the elves hadn't tried before. As for the other ingredients, there were the original tree mushrooms grown in the Demon's Ghost Islands, the cured ham from the shadow boar that was unique to the Forest Trolls' territory, the winter bamboo shoots from the black soil of the Goblins' Holy Land, Vic Mountain, the chicken eggs from the dwarf's chicken farm near Asen Castle, even the green onions were grown in the Saline Alkali farm near Lordimere Port. It was said that they tasted more delicious than normal onions. Meg's previous life was the vanguard general of the Roth Empire, so he was very familiar with the structure of the continent and the important regions. Although he didn't inherit his family's business in his previous life, Meg had been influenced by what he saw and heard since he was young, so he could easily tell how precious these ingredients were from his memory. A purple-striped prawn that cost 50 copper coins was expensive. No, even if the price was 10 times higher, Meg wouldn't think it was expensive. These ingredients definitely wouldn't be sold for this price even if they were sold in the place where they were produced. These were all good things that couldn't be bought with money. And if these ingredients were transported here from the place where they were produced, the price would be even higher. This world's preservation and air transport weren't so advanced. If one wanted to eat seafood in an inland city, they would have to have a magic caster use magic to maintain the seafood's life. However, this was even more extravagant than the red dust concubine's smile. In his memory, the royal family of the Roth Empire seemed to have a team that provided seafood exclusively. However, the team that transported the seafood was a huge bird called the Red Hawk. It was considered the air transport in this world. A fresh sea fish could be sold in the capital for 100 times the price at the port. A prawn, and a precious purple-striped prawn at that, in an inland city like Chaos City, it wouldn't be too much to sell it for 1,000 copper coins to a rich customer who wanted to eat it, right? Now, do you still think that this system is ripping you off? The system's voice sounded. No, no, no. System, you're too kind. You probably won't find another person in this world who is more kind than you. Meg said sincerely. This way of selling was a little too kind. Looking at the ingredients in the fridge, a bold idea suddenly came to his mind. He asked tentatively, "System, maybe I don't want to open a restaurant and just sell vegetables directly. I think that's a faster way to make money. The ingredients provided by the system can only be used in the restaurant. You're not allowed to sell them separately," the system replied calmly. Then, it said, "New mission, the host has to buy 3,000 gold coins worth of ingredients in 10 days with cash. If the mission is completed, a new recipe for La Girogiamo will be unlocked. If the mission is failed, your strength will be -0. 3,000 gold coins. Meg had expected that the system wouldn't allow him to sell vegetables, but the new mission almost made him scream out loud. 3,000 gold coins was equivalent to 300,000 copper coins. That was a huge sum of money. And it wasn't the turnover, but the cost of ingredients. The price of ingredients for a plate of Yangzhou fried rice was 3 gold coins, which meant that he had to sell 1,000 plates of Yangzhou fried rice in 10 days. If the mission was failed, his strength would be -0. 5, and he would return to being a semi-disabled person again. System, you're deliberately trying to make me a disabled person again, aren't you? Meg couldn't help but complain in his mind. Although he was very confident in his Yangzhou fried rice, it was an impossible task for a restaurant that hadn't opened yet to sell 1,000 plates of Yangzhou fried rice in 10 days. On the Norland continent, fried rice wasn't a popular cooking method. At least, as far as his predecessor could remember, he had never eaten fried rice. The mission has been issued. Please hurry up and finish it. The system didn't want to discuss it with Meg at all. Okay, let's not talk about this now. Seeing that there was no room for negotiation, Meg said with a smile, "System, I'm penniless now, and I haven't had breakfast yet. Can you provide me with ingredients for free again? If I starve to death, we can't continue our plan to become the god of cookery." Chapter 10. Isn't this just spending money? Meg was stunned for a while before he came back to his senses. Although he had never used the system before, he still had some understanding of it. The system was quite humane, but in order to not give him free food, it had put in a lot of effort. 3,000 copper coins could buy 10 servings of Yangzhou fried rice. If he could sell a few servings in the next 2 days, it would be fine. If he couldn't sell them, the system would probably come up with a loan shark plan. "System, my credit limit is too low, isn't it? I used to use a black card with no limit, and you only gave me 3,000. Are you questioning my credibility?" Meg was a little unconvinced. This limit is calculated by the system according to the host's current situation. Please make money as soon as possible. As the amount of ingredients purchased increases, the credit limit will also increase. The system replied. Meg thought about it carefully and found it to be true. Now, except for the foundation, everything else was sponsored by the system. It was already not bad to be able to give him 3,000 copper coins. He was used to not looking at the price when he spent money, so it was fun to calculate carefully. Anyway, as long as the restaurant opened for business, the egg fried rice would slowly become popular. At that time, he wouldn't have to worry about money. "Let's buy a set of ingredients first," Meg said in his heart. He took out the amount of ingredients he needed from the fridge. Originally, he only felt that these ingredients were good, but he didn't know what was so good about them. After listening to the system's story, he only felt that the rice in his hand was full of the taste of the spring of life. Since the rice is irrigated by the spring of life, can I extend my life after eating it? Meg suddenly asked curiously. The system only uses a very small branch of the spring of life to irrigate the rice. Eating it every day can strengthen the body, but it won't extend your life. The system replied. It can strengthen the body. Meg nodded. His body was his weakest point now, so he wanted to make up for it as much as possible. While scooping out the remaining rice from the rice cooker, he asked casually, "System, do you sell the spring of life?" "Not now." The system replied. "If you don't sell it now, then it might be sold in the future." Meg raised his eyebrows. He had basically figured out the system's way of speaking. The pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. When he had money in the future, he could drink the spring of life like herbal tea every day. His body would definitely be much better. The ingredients in this world were very different from those on Earth. Although they looked similar in appearance, the quality was greatly improved because of the environment. After eating it, it could strengthen the body or stimulate one's potential. Of course, Meg had to explore these things slowly. He was already looking forward to seeing what would happen when the recipes on Earth collided with the ingredients in this world. He ate the Yangzhou fried rice too quickly, so he didn't manage to taste it. He had to taste it carefully later. Skillfully handling the ingredients, Meg began to think about his new mission. The cost of a plate of fried rice was 296 copper coins. With the preciousness of these ingredients, Meg felt that 3,000 copper coins would be considered cheap. He definitely couldn't sell a plate of Yangzhou fried rice that cost 3,000 copper coins. He didn't dare to advertise the origin of these ingredients. If the elves knew that their holy spring was used to farm, no matter how good their temper was, they would shoot him into a sieve with their bows and arrows. The other races were also not to be trifled with. Regarding the origin of the ingredients, keeping it a secret was the best choice. Let's set it at 600 copper coins. After hesitating for a while, Meg made a decision. If he sold one plate, he could earn 304 copper coins. If he sold 1,000 plates, he would earn 3,040 gold coins. After making the decision, Meg didn't hesitate anymore. After all, this was only the first dish he had learned. When he learned how to cook meat dishes, it wouldn't be a problem to raise the price. If the starting point was too high, it wouldn't be easy to operate. And just now, the system had said that the second dish to be unlocked after the completion of this mission was la Rugiamo. Since even the pancakes could sell so well, la Rugiamo must also sell well. It should have a good effect on spreading the reputation of the restaurant. And more importantly, Amy loved pancakes so much. If she could eat la Rugiamo, which was 100 times better than pancakes, she would be very happy. It's just 1,000 plates of Yangzhou fried rice. I don't believe that I can't sell them. Meg regained his confidence. When he was thinking about whether he should do some marketing on the opening day, the system's voice suddenly sounded. Host, please confirm the price of the dishes and the name of the restaurant. The system will price the menu and change the restaurant's signboard. Yangzhou fried rice, 600 copper coins per plate. Meg directly answered. As for the name of the restaurant, he thought for a while and turned around to look at Amy, who was still leaning on the table and looking at the light from the cup. He nodded and said, "Let's call it Mamie's. It's Amy's and my restaurant. Yangzhou fried rice, 600 copper coins per plate, Mamie's. Confirmation complete. Transformation in progress, transformation complete." The system's voice sounded one after another. Meg noticed that there was an exquisite menu with a black leather cover on each table. There was also a signboard outside the door. From the kitchen, he could see the bottom corner of the signboard. It's really convenient to have a system. Meg shrugged. Yesterday, it was just a shabby wooden house. Overnight, it had become a mid-range restaurant. Otherwise, it would have taken him several months to renovate. After deftly cooking a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, Meg filled a small bowl with it for Amy. Then, he carried the plate and bowl out of the kitchen. Looking at Amy, who was leaning on the table and looking around with her eyes glued to the glass, Meg put down the things in his hands and leaned over to the glass. Through the glass filled with water, he stared at Amy and said in a deep voice, "Little princess, your rainbow fried rice is here. Please come and eat. Little princess has received it. Coming right up." Amy looked up and giggled at Meg's smiling face. She felt that her father had become very gentle and interesting today. He was not like before when he didn't talk all day long. "Eat." Meg put the small spoon in her hand. "Okay." Amy nodded. Looking at the colorful fried rice in the small bowl in front of her, she grabbed the bowl with one hand and the spoon with the other and started eating. Meg also picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of egg fried rice into his mouth. The fragrant egg wrapped around the rice, which was soft but firm, and mixed with the taste of various ingredients, constantly attacked his taste buds. He didn't know if it was because he knew the origin of these ingredients, but he felt that the taste of each ingredient was so clear and yet perfectly blended together. After swallowing, his mouth seemed to still be filled with the fragrance of the spring of life. Chapter 11. After eating a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, Meg sat down and savored it for a while. The fried rice made from these precious ingredients was not only good in taste. The most direct effect was to relieve fatigue. The tiredness from making 2 plates of Yangzhou fried rice in the morning had completely disappeared after eating a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. Now, his whole body was warm and he was even more energetic than after drinking Red Bull. It should be mainly because of the rice. If I eat that rice for 3 meals a day, my physical fitness should be able to steadily improve. Meg thought to himself. Among these ingredients, the most proper one was the rice that was irrigated by the spring of life. "Amy, do you feel anything after eating the rainbow fried rice?" Meg looked at Amy and asked. She had half-elf blood in her body, so there shouldn't be any adverse effects after eating rice irrigated by the spring of life, right? "It's super delicious." Amy put the small bowl on the table, stuck out her pink little tongue, and licked a grain of rice at the corner of her mouth. She looked at Meg and nodded seriously. Meg was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but smile. There was nothing wrong with this answer. He changed the topic and asked, then, other than being delicious and good-looking, "Do you feel any discomfort in your body?" "My body." Amy thought for a while and shook her head. After a while, she nodded again. "Where do you feel discomfort?" Meg suddenly stood up from the chair and leaned forward slightly to look at Amy. He suddenly looked a little nervous. It's like there's a fire burning in my body. I've felt it before, but it wasn't as hot as it is now. It's a little uncomfortable." "Father, what's wrong with Amy?" Amy looked at Meg, her little face already a little red. She looked at Meg with a little puzzlement, but she still looked quite calm. Meg, on the other hand, was a little flustered. He originally thought that since Amy was half-elf, eating the rice irrigated by the spring of life should benefit her a lot. But now, it seemed that this was not the case. Instead, it seemed to have stimulated something bad in her body. Looking at Amy's flushed face, Meg could not think of any solution. This was not a child's fever or a cold, and there was no way to deal with such a situation in his predecessor's memory. Seeing that Amy's face was getting redder and redder, he suddenly thought of something. He reached out to hold Amy's hand and said, "Amy, come with me, let's go to the Grey Temple. Father, I think I know what to do." However, Amy retracted her hand and shook her head. She raised her right hand in front of her with her palm facing up as if she was holding something up. "Amy, what are you doing?" Meg looked at Amy in confusion. Suddenly, a ball of bluish-purple flame rose from her palm. It rose up 1/2 meter into the air, and the terrifying temperature caused the air to distort a little. Meg almost subconsciously took 2 steps back, and even the bench was knocked to the ground by him. He stared at the bluish-purple flame that was slowly leaping in Amy's palm. The flame gradually subsided, and finally turned into a small bluish-purple fireball. "Amy, are you all right?" Meg hurriedly looked at Amy and asked. The fireball looked even smaller than Amy's little hand, but its temperature was a little terrifying. He could feel a dangerous aura from it. He was worried about Amy, but he couldn't get close to her. He couldn't help but feel even more anxious. "Father, I'm fine. Look at this fireball. It's so cute. Is this magic?" Amy shook her head. The redness on her face had receded a lot, and she looked at the fireball in her hand excitedly. Meg heaved a sigh of relief. He watched as Amy's complexion slowly returned to normal. It seemed that the appearance of this fireball had balanced the heat and discomfort in her body. However, he narrowed his eyes as he looked at the bluish-purple fireball. He wasn't sure if this was magic. Shouldn't the flames of a normal fireball spell be fiery red? Amy looked at Meg, who was narrowing his eyes slightly, and a hint of panic appeared on her face. Her hand trembled, and the fireball in her hand was extinguished. She immediately retracted her hand, and lowered her head as if she had done something wrong. "Father, don't be angry. I know I was wrong. I won't mention learning magic in the future." After saying that, she stole a glance at Meg, and an aggrieved expression appeared on her little face. Meg looked at Amy, who suddenly admitted her mistake, and hesitated for a moment. Soon, he found the answer in his predecessor's memory. In order to hide his identity and protect Amy, his predecessor had been keeping a low profile after coming to Chaos City. Amy had to wear a hat that could cover her ears when she went out. This was to prevent others from discovering that she was a half-elf. She had shown a strong interest in magic since she was a child, but was strictly forbidden from touching anything related to magic, let alone learning magic. Meg looked at Amy, who had lowered her head, and couldn't help but feel sorry for her. His predecessor wanted to keep a low profile and let Amy live like a normal person. He could understand his predecessor's behavior of trying to protect her. However, understanding didn't mean that he agreed. Meg wouldn't suppress Amy's nature. In his opinion, keeping a low profile was right, but being content with mediocrity was just a lie to comfort oneself. He had once read a sentence in his previous life: "Mediocrity isn't scary. What's scary is living a mediocre life and lying to oneself that mediocrity is the truth." Meg Alex's life couldn't be described as mediocre, but he wanted Amy to live a mediocre life. This was something that Meg couldn't accept. She had the bloodline of the strongest human knight and the princess of the elves. Perhaps she was a genius. After all, Amy had learned the fireball magic by herself. Based on his predecessor's memory, he wouldn't have dared to run into such a fireball even if he was in his prime. Looking at Amy, who had lowered her head and was tapping her index finger, Meg's heart softened. What a lovely daughter. Of course she could do whatever she wanted. He should be the one to bear the responsibility of working hard. "Amy, raise your head and look at me," Meg said with a smile. "Father, I don't want to learn." Amy hesitated for a moment before raising her head to look at Meg. Although her father was very amiable today, she still remembered how angry he was when she said she wanted to learn magic. She didn't want to make her father angry and unhappy. "No, Amy, from now on, I won't stop you from learning magic. When the restaurant opens and we make enough money, I'll send you to the Great Temple to learn magic," Meg interrupted her with a smile. He looked into her eyes, and said earnestly, "Amy, from now on, I won't stop you from learning magic." "Really?" Amy was stunned for a moment. She looked at Meg with surprise and disbelief. "Of course it's true." Meg nodded. "But it might take some time because the restaurant only opens today, Father," you're the best. Amy loves you." Before Meg could finish his words, Amy had already slipped down from the chair and jumped into his arms. She hugged his face and kissed him. Then she looked up at Meg and said with a serious face, "Meg will definitely become a very powerful magic caster. Protecting father is my wish." Chapter 12. Amy nodded obediently and prepared to get down from Meg's lap. However, she quickly stopped and looked at him, her eyes slowly widening. "Father, you're hugging Amy. You can hug Amy now." As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes, and her little face was filled with excitement. Other than when she could snuggle in her father's arms on the bed, Amy had never seen her father hug her. She knew that it was because of his health, but she had always wanted to be hugged in his arms. She didn't expect that her wish would come true today. Meg smiled and scratched Amy's delicate nose. He nodded and said, "Yes, I can finally hug Amy. In the future, I can even lift you up high and princess carry you. As long as it's something that Amy wants to do, I can do it for you." When he held Amy in his arms, how could he not be excited? Sure enough, health was the most important thing. He had to complete this mission. He didn't want to return to his previous state where he couldn't even walk properly. Amy pressed her face against Meg's chest and rubbed it against him like a kitten. She said happily, "That's great. Father is so great." After comforting the little one for a while, Meg confirmed that Amy's body didn't feel any discomfort after releasing that ball of bluish-purple flames. Only then did he feel a little relieved. Moreover, Amy also demonstrated to Meg that she could release that bluish-purple fireball at any time now. She didn't need to chant any incantations. She only needed to think it in her mind and it was absolutely instantaneous. His predecessor didn't know much about magic casters, and the things about that mysterious elven princess in his memory were all very vague. Meg couldn't even find her face, but he vaguely remembered that she seemed to be a powerful magic caster. Looks like her magic talent is inherited from her mother. Instant fireball magic should be pretty good, right? But she can't control it very well yet. Meg rubbed his chin and thought. His predecessor's worries were not wrong. If the elves found out about Amy's identity, who knew what would happen? Whether it was hurting her or taking her away from him, he could not accept it. "I still have to consider the Grey Temple. Perhaps I should find a more reliable mage. I have to find out more about him first." Meg decided that he couldn't rush the matter of letting Amy learn magic. He had to be more considerate. Meg flipped open the black leather-covered menu on the table. The leather was smooth and comfortable to the touch. When he opened the menu, he saw the words written in black at the top left of the menu, "Yangzhou fried rice, 600 copper coins per serving." It was simple and clear, yet stylish. The taste of this system is not bad. Meg closed the menu contentedly. "Father, is our family's restaurant really open for business today?" Amy asked Meg as she stood at the side. "Yes, it's open for business. I hope we can sell more rainbow fried rice today." Meg smiled and stroked Amy's hair. He held Amy's little hand and walked towards the door. Meg reached out to grab the doorknob. He heaved a sigh of relief and pushed the door open. The two bells hanging on the door rang twice, and the door was pushed open. The warm sunshine of early autumn sprinkled on the two figures, one big and one small, standing at the door, elongating two long shadows in the dining room behind them. Rebirth seems to be pretty good. Standing at the door, Meg looked at the three big black words hanging above the door, Amy's. He held Amy's little hand and whispered to himself. "Father, what are you talking about?" Amy looked up at Meg in confusion. "I'm saying, Meg, it's so good to have you." Meg looked down at the little one who didn't even reach his waist and smiled dotingly. I think father is very good too. Amy ran 2 laps around Meg happily. Then, she clasped her hands in front of her mouth like a trumpet and shouted towards the square, Amy's family's restaurant is open for business. Everyone, come and eat. They have super delicious rainbow fried rice. Meg looked at the little one smiling helplessly. He was also very happy. He looked up. It was still early in the morning, and there weren't many people in the Aiden Square yet. On the grass not far away, 2 burly orcs with horns were wrestling with bare upper bodies. Further away, 2 humans dressed as merchants were standing under a tree and talking. A tall elf with a long bow on his back walked past in a hurry, followed by 2 trolls with curiosity on their faces. Meg looked at this scene with surprise. Although he had seen what all the races looked like in the memory of his predecessor, seeing them with his own eyes was completely different. Powerful orcs, cunning goblins, long-lived elves. Everything suddenly became so real, and he really felt like he had come to this world. It seemed that it wasn't as easy as he thought to live a good life with Amy here. Meg raised an eyebrow and looked back at his restaurant. Since the restaurant was opened in Chaos City, its customers naturally weren't just humans. After all, elves, giant dragons, and demons were all famous for their wealth. The Aiden Square was located in the center of Chaos City. The city builders had planned the buildings around the Aiden Square to form a crescent shape, with the southern side of the square being empty. There were over 1,000 different types of shops, restaurants, blacksmiths, red light districts, arenas, magic shops. As long as it was a shop on the Norland continent, it could be found in the Aiden Square. There were shops of all races, and any random restaurant could be a pancake shop opened by a flame demon, the kind that could be baked directly in one's hand. Chaos City was established after the peace treaty was signed, and all the races wanted to interact with each other. Back then, the entire continent was like a pancake that had been sliced horizontally and vertically, and the intersection point was divided into the territories of all the races. Chaos City was built on the intersection point of all the races, and it wasn't an exaggeration to call it the center of the continent. Because it intersected with the territories of all the races, there were 8 city gates, and people of all races could enter. In the city, orcs, humans, elves, goblins, trolls, demons, dwarves, and giant dragons would appear from time to time. This chaotic situation was also the origin of the name Chaos City. However, after the initial chaos, a mysterious organization called the Great Temple appeared in Chaos City, and began to manage the order of Chaos City. At the same time, Chaos City slowly developed to its current scale and structure. The gray-robed men who walked in the darkness were the law enforcers of this city. Meg's restaurant was the last shop on the tail of the crescent moon in the Aiden Square. The entrance to the square was on the other side, so very few people would come here. Next to the restaurant was a weapon shop. According to Meg's memory, it was opened by a dwarf. There were a few shops in front of the restaurant that were closed, and there were signs for rent on the doors. Further away, there was a shop that sold magic potions. There were 2 bird cages hanging in front of the shop, in which there were 2 sleeping parrots. Chapter 13. After watching from the entrance for a while, he noticed that there were only a few passers-by looking at the restaurant, which was decorated in a completely different style from the surrounding shops. However, for the time being, no one wanted to try it out. Back at the restaurant, Mag cleared the table, and went into the kitchen to wash the dishes. Amy, on the other hand, was sitting on the high chair behind the counter, playing with the bluish-purple flame in her hand excitedly as she chanted a bunch of incantations. After cleaning up the kitchen, Meg came out. Seeing that there were still no customers coming, he sat down on the chair beside Amy and watched her play with the fire. "Father, if I throw this fireball out, will it be the same as a magician's magic?" Amy suddenly turned to look at Meg and asked, raising her hand and making a throwing gesture. No, no, no. Meg hurriedly waved his hand. If this fireball was thrown out, even if the restaurant wasn't burned down, a few tables and chairs would definitely be destroyed. According to the stingy nature of the system, the remaining 2,700 copper coins might not even be enough for him to deduct. Don't worry, Father. I won't really throw it out. Seeing Meg's nervous expression, Amy chuckled and waved her hand to disperse the bluish-purple fireball in her hand. If you can throw it out and hit it accurately, then it should be called the fireball technique. Meg heaved a sigh of relief. After thinking about Amy's question, he nodded and said, "Then I don't know how to do it." Amy shook her head, somewhat lacking in confidence. "It's okay. Before you become my disciple, I'll practice with you every morning. No one is born with it. Our Amy is already very good at making a fireball." "I believe you can do it," Meg said with a smile and looked at Amy encouragingly. Yes, yes. I'll work hard." Amy nodded vigorously. She turned to look in the direction of the door and said a little hesitantly, "But Father, why isn't anyone coming in to eat? Your rainbow fried rice is so delicious." "Because they haven't eaten it before, they don't know how delicious it is. In the future, there will definitely be a lot of people lining up to eat it," Meg said with a smile, feeling a little helpless in his heart. However, 600 copper coins was indeed an exorbitant price for the average person, but Chaos City had no lack of rich people. Regardless of race, there would always be a group of rich people who loved thrills and excitement. They would often come to Chaos City for a few rounds, and some of them would even live there for a long time. After all, as long as one had money, a dwarf could enjoy the service of a beautiful human lady, a troll could find a devil dancer, and even a goblin could find a half-elf to accompany him in drinking. Here, one could do anything with money. "If there are a lot of guests, then I can help Father." Amy looked at Meg with sparkling eyes. "Then what can Meg do?" Meg asked with a smile. "Amy can help Father collect money. I learned arithmetic from Teacher Luna a few days ago, and Teacher Luna said I learned it very well," Amy said, as if she was asking for credit. "Teacher Luna?" Meg tried to recall, and soon remembered that she was a teacher at Chaos School under the Grey Temple. In his impression, she was a young girl who liked to wear dark green dresses. She was usually a little cold, but when she was with children, she was like a completely different person. She became very amiable and well-liked by the children. Amy didn't have the money to pay the tuition fees, so she wasn't qualified to enter the school. However, she often went to Chaos School and leaned against the wall to watch the classes. Teacher Luna liked her very much, and often called her in to listen to the classes together. Sometimes, she would teach her some arithmetic alone and bring her delicious food. Therefore, his predecessor had a good impression of her. "Yes, and if they don't pay, then Amy will yell at them and scare them with a fireball," Amy said, nodding. "Yell at them? Will Meg yell at them?" Meg was a little doubtful. "Of course. I've seen Grandpa Dwarf yell at people before." Amy nodded seriously. Then, she raised her little fists and put them in front of her face. She stared at Meg with wide eyes, and said, "Pay up, or I'll beat them all to death." "Father, do I look super fierce like this?" Amy asked, looking at Meg expectantly. "You're so cute." Meg felt his heart melt, but seeing Amy's expectant expression, he had to hold back his laughter and nodded. "Yes, super fierce." Amy put down her hands, and said happily, "Then the task of collecting money will be handed over to Amy. I promise to complete the task." "Okay, then I'll have to trouble our Amy in the future. But when I have time, Father will teach you how to look more fierce." Meg nodded with a smile. He did not refuse Amy's request, but her current appearance was too cute. When he had time, he had to teach her well. Otherwise, she would not be able to control the situation. Then, under Amy's pestering, Meg told her the story of the little match girl. Although it was a version that was arbitrarily edited and added, the little girl still listened with great interest. "Father, is that roast goose really delicious?" Amy asked Meg expectantly when she heard the end of the story. "It's probably quite delicious." Meg nodded, but suddenly felt that something was not quite right. Was the main point of the story really the roast goose in the window? After the story was finished, the two of them leaned on the counter in boredom. Their chins rested on the back of their hands, and they were in a daze. Their expressions and movements were a little synchronized. Meg knew that it would be difficult at the beginning, but he did not expect that for the whole morning. Other than the two demon children looking out of the glass window for a while, there were no customers at all. At noon, Amy turned to look at Meg and said, "Father, Meg is hungry. I'll go cook." Meg smiled and nodded. He got up and went into the kitchen. There was nothing he could do if no one came. He could not do something like standing at the door and shouting. As for the attitude of the customers, he had already thought about it while he was in a daze. Although it was his first time being a boss, he had eaten in many restaurants in his previous life. When it came to customer experience, he knew more than many restaurant owners. Although a warm attitude would make people feel valued, it would also make some customers who did not like to communicate with others feel uncomfortable. And an overly arrogant and cold attitude would make most of the customers' dining experience plummet. The saying, "going too far is as bad as not going far enough," was very appropriate here. Moreover, there were only two people in Meg's restaurant, Amy and him. It was already very good that Amy could complete the task of collecting money. Naturally, he still had to deal with the reception. Therefore, Meg summed up his experience, and based on the current situation of the restaurant, he decided to adhere to 3 words: kindness, distance, and equality. Kindness was the basic respect for the customers. It could make the customers feel good before eating. As for distance, it was a choice that Meg made to increase efficiency, and also to make the customers who did not like too warm a reception feel at ease. The final equality was for all races. Meg felt that as long as they entered the restaurant and chose to spend money, they were all customers. He would choose to treat them equally regardless of race. Chapter 14. Mamie's Restaurant. Where did this restaurant come from? Mulby stood outside the restaurant with a black hammer that was almost as tall as him slung over his shoulder. Sweat trickled down his grayish-white beard and dripped onto his half-exposed reddish-black chest. His face, which had been scorched red by the furnace, was filled with confusion. Yesterday afternoon, he had seen a dilapidated wooden house where a father and daughter lived. The father was a cripple who could barely walk, and had never spoken to him before. The little daughter wore a gray hat all day long, and was quite adorable. Sometimes, she would squat at the door of the weapons shop to watch him forge weapons. But in just one night, the wooden house that was about to collapse had completely changed. It had turned into a beautiful 2-story building. Transparent crystals had replaced the entire wall on the first floor, and one could see the exquisitely decorated dining room inside. Mulby was a little confused for a moment. Even in the Aden Square, there was no other restaurant that was more beautiful than this. After all, the transparent crystal walls were so light and translucent, and the tables were very clean and comfortable. The translucent crystal chandelier was even more exquisite than the ones in the royal palace. Could it be that the crippled human is actually a very powerful magic caster? Then, he created this restaurant overnight and decided to start cooking. Mulby stroked his beard and shook his head. Cunning human minds are indeed hard to fathom. However, since the restaurant has opened here, I might as well go and try it. If it's good, I won't have to travel so far to eat in the future. He was certain that this restaurant was opened by the father and daughter because he could already see the little girl sitting behind the counter in a daze through the transparent crystal wall. She wasn't wearing a hat today, and looked even more adorable. Mulby raised his hammer and pushed open the door. The sound of the bell on the door gave him a start. He looked up at the two small bells hanging on the door, and a self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. Only then did he stride in. After entering the restaurant, it looked cleaner and more comfortable than the outside. Although the decorations were exquisite, the brownish-gray style of the restaurant made people feel comfortable. It was not dazzling to the eyes. Instead, it made people feel relaxed. Mulby lowered his head to look at his clothes, which were burned with holes by the sparks, and his boots, which were covered in a thick layer of dust. He then looked at the clean and bright floor and hesitated for a moment. "Father." There were guests. "It's the dwarf grandpa next door." Amy, who was leaning against the counter and waiting for her food, had her eyes lit up. When she saw who came in, she turned around and shouted excitedly in the direction of the kitchen. Meg, who had just finished preparing the ingredients for the fried rice, heard the bell and Amy's voice. He turned to look at the door in surprise. The door was pushed open, and an old dwarf with a heavy black hammer on his shoulder came in. He had short hair and a grayish-white beard. His chest was open, revealing his strong muscles. His arms were as thick as an ordinary person's thighs. He was wearing animal skin clothes that were full of holes, and there was a cowhide wineskin hanging from his waist. This was the first time he had seen a real dwarf. The dwarf's height reached his waist. Because of his strong muscles, he looked a little square, like a standing box. This was the owner of the weapon shop next door, the dwarf blacksmith Mulby. He was one of the few blacksmiths in Chaos City. Dwarves also lived very long lives. He should be over 200 years old, but he was still very healthy. Back then, his predecessor had carefully observed the shop owners and the people who frequented this area. Although he might not be able to name them, he still had a rough idea of their identities. This was the first customer. Meg was naturally happy and expectant. He took a towel and wiped his hands. When he walked out of the kitchen, he saw Mulby standing at the door hesitantly. He glanced at the grayish-black cowhide boots on his feet and understood. He didn't go out to greet him. Instead, he stood at the counter and patted Amy's head to signal her to be quiet. Then he smiled and said, "Hello, are you here to eat?" Mulby looked at Mag with a hint of surprise in his heart. That hunchback man in tattered clothes from before was now wearing a set of well-tailored clothes. Although he was still thin and weak, when he stood with his back straight, his temperament was like a completely different person. Human men were a little effeminate in his eyes, especially those thin and weak ones, which disgusted him even more. However, although this man looked thin and weak, when he stood there, he looked like an unsheathed sword. He didn't look effeminate at all. This man was not simple. The kind smile on his face reduced the sharpness by a lot. This contrast formed a faint sense of distance, which made Mulby, who was entering the restaurant for the first time, feel quite comfortable. The little loli standing beside him didn't wear a hat today. She wore a little black dress, and her face was full of joy and anticipation. She looked even cuter. He didn't know what had happened to this man overnight. It was as if he had been reborn. Mulby couldn't help but be curious about what this human man's restaurant was selling. Was it worthy of the restaurant's decorations? "Yes, I want to eat." "What do you have to eat here?" Mulby didn't hesitate. He nodded and walked in with his hammer. He pulled out a chair and sat down. He put the hammer in his hand on the ground and looked at Mulby. "There is a menu on the table. You can take a look first." Meg pointed at the menu on the table. "Ha!" Mulby picked up the menu on the table and slid his rough, calloused hand across the cover. He couldn't help but be surprised. This delicate texture was definitely made from the best bison leather. Just a piece of leather like this could be sold for 1 dragon coin. 1 menu per table. How luxurious. Even the Friar Tavern, which had the best business in the Aden Square, only had a normal leather cover. This made Mabai even more expectant. Such a luxurious restaurant with such a luxurious menu. There must be a lot of dishes. Besides drinking, what he liked most was food. He had to admit that although ordinary humans were weak, in terms of eating, other races couldn't compare. Mabai opened the cover and looked at it expectantly. However, he was stunned. Such a big menu, but after opening it, it was completely blank. No, it wasn't completely blank. In the upper left corner, there was a small line of words. Mabai squinted and read softly, Yangzhou fried rice, 600 copper coins per serving, 600 copper coins. Mabai was stunned for a moment. He blinked a few times, thinking that maybe he had been staring at the stove for too long in the morning, and his eyes were a little blurry. He picked up the menu and looked at it again. It was still written on the menu, Yangzhou fried rice, 600 copper coins per plate. Chapter 15. Meg shook his head with a smile and said calmly, the menu is correct. It's just that the restaurant has just opened, so there aren't many dishes. We'll introduce new ones later. I'm not talking about the dishes, but the price. What is this Yangzhou fried rice? 600 copper coins per plate. Did you use giant dragon meat to stir-fry this? Mabai shook his head and pointed at the small line of words on the menu. He was a little annoyed. The decoration of the restaurant was nice, and the owner was pleasing to the eye. He didn't expect the owner to take advantage of him. The line was so small. If he ordered it without reading it clearly, he would have spent 600 copper coins for nothing. With 600 copper coins, he could buy a big plate of roast meat and 2 bottles of strong liquor at Friar's Tavern. He could even fill his wine bag when he went back. Mabai's good impression of Meg was gone again. Humans are indeed the best at disguising and the most cunning. I'm sorry. It's not made with dragon meat, but the price is correct. I think this Yangzhou fried rice is worth the price, or even more. You can choose whether you want to order or not, Mag said in a neither servile nor overbearing tone, but he didn't explain too much. Meg had expected that some customers would question the price, but he had absolute confidence in his Yangzhou fried rice. Was 600 copper coins not worth it? If it weren't for the mission of 1,000 plates of Yangzhou fried rice, he would have set the price at 6,000 copper coins. This Yangzhou fried rice was made with rice irrigated by the spring of life and various rare ingredients. It was made with the best cooking skills in this world. Mabai stared at Meg, trying to suppress his anger. Humans are indeed cunning. They can say such things without changing their expressions. Although the style of this restaurant was indeed very good, he paid the most attention to the taste of the food. The restaurant's appearance was secondary. What on earth was this Yangzhou fried rice? He couldn't figure it out from the name. What was Yangzhou? Could rice be eaten if it was fried? He had eaten in all the restaurants in Chaos City in the past few decades, but he had never heard of this dish. Mabai stared at Mag for a long while, but Mag's expression remained calm and collected. There was no hint of guilt or impatience in his expression, and it was as if he were waiting for him to make a decision. He had seen all kinds of people in his decades of running a weapons shop. Not many people could have such a mentality in front of him, and they were all capable people. He couldn't help but wonder if there was something special about this Yangzhou fried rice. Is it really worth 600 copper coins? He hesitated, and then asked, you said the price is correct. Are you sure this Yangzhou fried rice is delicious? Whether it's delicious or not has a lot to do with personal taste. Mag shook his head. No matter how delicious something was, some people would find it disgusting. Looking at Mobai's furious expression, he couldn't help but heave an internal sigh. It appeared that this first customer was most likely going to be a failure. You! Mobai was even more annoyed. Other shops couldn't wait to praise their food to the heavens, but this guy retorted with, I can't guarantee. He can't even guarantee that it's delicious. Looks like he's lying. If he thinks it's not delicious, he can say it's a personal taste problem. This human is too cunning. I'd better not eat. Father, Amy is hungry. At this time, Amy, who had been watching them talk, looked up at Meg and said with a pout. Then she glanced at Mobai with disdain. This dwarf grandpa is taking so long to order such delicious rainbow fried rice. Father should have already made one. Mobai, who was about to get up and leave, was too embarrassed to stand up when Amy gave him a disdainful look. The little girl's expression was clearly disdaining him for taking up her meal time. Okay, I'll go make Yangzhou fried rice for Amy. Meg smiled and patted the little girl's head. Then he looked at Mobai and said, Customer, please take your time to decide. Call me when you've made up your mind. Then he turned and went into the kitchen to prepare the fried rice. The rainbow fried rice is really delicious. Amy loves it. Grandpa Dwarf, are you sure you don't want to order one? Amy sat down on the high stool behind the counter again. She looked at Mobai with her chin in her hands, blinked, and said innocently. So cute. Mobai felt that his steel-like heart, which had been tempered thousands of times, was actually softened at this moment. He almost blurted out, Of course I want one. But when he thought of his doubts and annoyance just now, if he were to order now because of the little girl's words, wouldn't he lose face? He forced himself to hold it back, crossed his arms, and said coolly, I'll take a look and decide later. Okay, anyway, you'll fall in love with the taste later. Amy shrugged, as if she had already seen through everything. She ignored Mobai and turned to look at the kitchen expectantly. Mobai felt that he was despised again. He was despised by a little girl twice in a row. But looking at her cute face, what could he do? He could only forgive her. I'd like to see if the Yangzhou fried rice is really that delicious, or if this little girl has also been corrupted by that human, Mobai thought to himself. He was not in a hurry to leave, so he sat there and waited patiently. He had practiced tens of thousands of times in the test field for the god of cookery, and he had already cooked it twice in the real world. Therefore, it only took Meg less than 10 minutes to make a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. When he came out with a plate of fried rice, Meg looked at Mobai, who was still sitting there, a little surprised. He thought that this grumpy customer had already left. It smells so good, Father is so awesome. Amy jumped down from the high stool, stared at the plate of fried rice in Meg's hand, and clapped her little hands happily. This is Yangzhou fried rice. It doesn't look that special, does it? Although it looks pretty good, there's no meat at all. It's definitely not satisfying. Mobai, who was looking forward to it, suddenly felt a little disappointed when he saw the fried rice. Meg put the fried rice on the table across from Mobai and said to Amy with a smile, Go wash your hands first, then come and eat. Okay. Amy trotted into the kitchen, stepped on a stool, and washed her hands. Then she trotted back to the table, climbed onto a chair, and moved closer to the plate to smell it. Her big blue eyes suddenly became brighter. At this time, the smell of the fried rice also drifted to Mobai's table. He couldn't help but take a breath, and his eyes suddenly widened. He looked at the fried rice in front of Amy in disbelief. This smell. Why is it so tempting? Amy, start eating, Amy said with a spoon in her hand. Then she scooped up a spoonful of fried rice and put it into her mouth. She chewed happily, and her little face was full of joy as if she was enjoying a delicious meal. She ate one mouthful after another, swaying her body slightly as if she couldn't stop at all. Chapter 16. After Mawbai called out, he felt a little embarrassed. Just a moment ago, he was full of doubts, but now he took the initiative to ask for a bowl. This slap to his face was a little painful. It's mainly because this little girl is eating so happily that I couldn't help myself. Mawbai glanced at Amy, who was eating happily opposite him, and said in his heart. He unconsciously pulled back his head that was stretched out in front of him and put on a cool posture again. Actually, I don't really want to eat, but I feel that I should give this little girl some face, so I'll reluctantly eat a bowl. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg nodded. Of course, he wouldn't say anything at this time. However, the moment he turned around, he couldn't help but laugh. This arrogant tone was really interesting. Grandpa Dwarf, the rainbow fried rice is really super delicious. Amy swallowed the rice in her mouth, scooped up another big spoonful, and continued, Look, isn't this fried rice very beautiful? You really want to eat it? Mawbai looked at the rice wrapped in golden eggs, the fried rice mixed with various ingredients on the spoon, and the little girl holding the spoon, whose eyes were as pure as the sky, and nodded subconsciously. Then I'll eat it for you to see. Amy nodded, then opened her mouth and ate all the fried rice on the spoon in one mouthful. As she chewed, she said happily, Delicious, really delicious. Mawbai opened his mouth and looked at the little girl who was completely immersed in the fried rice in front of him. For a moment, he felt like he had a lot to say, but he just couldn't say it. If the person sitting opposite him was a man, the hammer next to him would have been on his head, but looking at the little girl eating happily, he couldn't get angry at all. In fact, he felt that she was quite cute. Mawbai, who had been forging iron for the whole morning, was a little hungry. Now that he saw the little girl eating happily, he felt even more hungry. If it weren't for his rationality, he would have snatched a few spoonfuls of fried rice to eat. Soon, Meg put 2 servings of rice into the rice cooker to cook. Then, he carried out a plate of Yangzhou fried rice and gently placed it in front of Mawbai. He smiled and said, Your Yangzhou fried rice. Mawbai's gaze was completely attracted by the fried rice in front of him. The rich aroma of chopped green onions and eggs assaulted his nostrils. He couldn't help but salivate. He had never smelled such a tempting aroma from food before. Outside of the rice grains, there was a layer of golden egg. It was slightly oily and seemed to glow under the light. The colorful ingredients that were cut into the size of rice grains were mixed together with the rice. The color was bright and vibrant. With so many ingredients mixed together, it was actually stir-fried with oil. Furthermore, there was no pepper or salt at the side. Could it be that this food had been seasoned? This completely overturned Mawbai's understanding of food. Meg stood aside and watched. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was actually a little expectant and nervous. Although Amy's feedback was that the fried rice was super delicious, in her mind, the most delicious thing was the pancakes, so her opinion could only be used as a reference. And Mawbai could be said to be the first customer in a real sense. His reaction and feedback were more valuable. He could roughly judge whether the Yangzhou fried rice was to the taste of people in this world. What kind of cooking method is this? Is it really delicious? Mawbai was a little doubtful, but driven by the aroma, he couldn't help but hold the spoon and put a spoonful of fried rice into his mouth, chewing a few times. The egg almost melted in his mouth. The winter bamboo shoots and green beans cut into the size of rice grains were crispy and delicious. The rice wrapped in the egg was full of sweetness after being chewed. The soft ham was mixed into the rice, and there seemed to be the taste of shrimp. All kinds of flavors were included in one bite. After one bite, he felt warm all over, and the fragrance of the rice still lingered between his lips and teeth. Mobai's eyes suddenly lit up. Delicious. It's really too delicious. How can there be such delicious food in this world? That was the only thought left in Mobai's mind. He couldn't help but put a big spoonful of fried rice into his mouth with the spoon in his hand. Then he simply held the plate with one hand and the spoon with the other. He just couldn't stop eating, one bite after another. 600 copper coins is expensive. He didn't think such delicious food was expensive even if it was sold for 1,000 copper coins. Compared to this, the barbecue in Friar's Tavern was simply shoddy. He could tolerate the burnt smell before, but from now on, he wouldn't be able to tolerate it anymore. This bowl of Yangzhou fried rice was as if it had been carefully mixed by a master. In his hundreds of years as a foodie who had eaten all over the Norland continent, this was the first time he had tasted something so delicious. The doubts he had about Meg and the mockery he had in his heart were now thrown to the back of his mind. Dignity and whatnot were nothing in front of such delicious food. And what surprised Mobai even more was that the warm feeling he felt after eating this Yangzhou fried rice was not an illusion, but a real feeling. It made him feel comfortable all over, as if something was nourishing his body. The tiredness he had felt after swinging a heavy hammer the whole morning was quickly alleviating and dispelling. It was like drinking a bottle of recovery potion, only this kind of recovery was softer and more comfortable, from the inside out. It didn't make him feel more tired after drinking the potion at all. It reminded him of the elven holy spring, the spring of life. Grandpa Dwarf, isn't the rainbow fried rice super delicious? Amy giggled. She looked at Mobai, who couldn't stop eating, and said, Amy said you would love this taste. Meg stood aside with a smile on his face. Mobai's behavior had explained everything. He couldn't resist this Yangzhou fried rice at all, so he didn't have to worry about whether the restaurant would be popular or not. It was a good start. Yes, I've already fallen in love with this taste. Mobai put down the plate in his hand, looked at Meg, and said, Boss, give me another plate of Yangzhou fried rice. It's so delicious. Just then, the system's voice suddenly sounded. The system recommends that the host implement a purchase restriction system, which can greatly increase the customer's expectation and stickiness. Meg was stunned. System, aren't you a vegetable seller? He asked in his mind. The system is mainly responsible for urging the host to learn cooking and providing the required ingredients, the system emphasized. It seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Meg's position as a vegetable seller. Chapter 17. Meg entered the kitchen. The rice in the rice cooker was just done. He scooped out a bowl and let it dry for a while. Then, he used his credit card to buy the ingredients for a bowl of Yangzhou fried rice and started to make the second one. Meg wouldn't think about limiting the amount of ingredients he could buy now. The task of 1,000 bowls of Yangzhou fried rice was no joke. However, if the restaurant's business was really good in the future, limiting the amount of ingredients he could buy was a way to respect the customers. As for the system's suggestion, he wasn't stupid. The system probably wanted him to return to his semi-disabled state. The system's suggestion is to help the host walk further on the path of becoming the god of cooking, the system's voice suddenly sounded. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect the system to read his thoughts. Instead, he was magnanimous. He asked, System, in order to help me walk further on the path of becoming the god of cooking, let me give you a suggestion as well. Please go ahead, the system replied. I think you should lower the price of the ingredients by half, Meg said seriously. The ingredients provided by the system are all from. The system replied. I have the same attitude towards your suggestion. Meg didn't wait for the system to finish and directly ended the conversation. A line of ellipses floated in Meg's mind. Meg's lips curled up slightly. He started to process the ingredients quickly. What a joke. He was famous for his sharp tongue. He never lost a verbal battle. He didn't even have a single fan. It was a piece of cake for him to argue with the system. Mulbai was sitting down and feeling the changes in his body. After finishing a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, the warm feeling in his body began to fade away. However, the feeling of tiredness didn't disappear. It was still there. He clenched his fists. His condition was similar to when he had just woken up this morning. He was full of energy. At this level, it should be worth half a bottle of middle-grade recovery potion. Plus, I don't feel exhausted at all. One bottle of mid-level recovery potion costs 20 gold coins, and I need to use one bottle of mid-level recovery potion per day. But 2 bowls of Yangzhou fried rice, which is even more delicious and effective, only cost 12 gold coins. It's really a good deal. Mulbai quickly calculated in his mind, and the conclusion made his eyes light up. The forging of each weapon required more than 10,000 swings of a hammer that weighed nearly 100 kilograms. The high remuneration corresponded to the high intensity of labor and forging skills. Mulbai's body's recovery ability was no longer as good as when he was young. In order to complete his daily workload, he had to drink a bottle of disgusting intermediate recovery potion at noon every day. However, the dependence on this item was too strong, and he could already feel that his body was slowly corroding due to long-term consumption. At this rate, he could only maintain his forging precision for 5 years at most. The day that he lost his precision would be the day that the reputation that he had built in Chaos City for the past few decades would collapse. Although he had saved up quite a bit of savings with the price of at least 1,000 gold coins for a weapon, he knew that the money was far from enough for what he wanted to do. 5 years was too short. He needed at least 10 more years of high-intensity forging every day before he could do it. This Yangzhou fried rice was like a ray of light that suddenly appeared in the endless darkness for him. He saw hope all of a sudden. Let's try another one. If the recovery effect is really good, I can eat it every day in the future. At first, he felt a little heartache about the money he had spent. But compared to the potion that made him want to vomit after taking a sip, this Yangzhou fried rice, which was extremely delicious and almost half cheaper than the potion, was not difficult to choose between if the effects were the same. Grandpa Dwarf, didn't you just say that you wouldn't fall in love with this taste? Amy had also finished her Yangzhou fried rice. She licked her lips and looked at Mulbai with a smile, her little face full of innocence. Mulbai blushed under Amy's stare. He coughed dryly and said, I was just testing the boss to see if he was confident in his cooking skills. I didn't expect that he wouldn't be confident even though his cooking skills are so good, so I was trying to raise his confidence. Really? Amy looked at Mulbai suspiciously. Of course it's true. I'm not the kind of person who says that it's not tasty before I even try it. Mulbai nodded seriously, with a hint of pride in his voice. Then I'll take it as true. Amy looked at Mulbai helplessly. She slid down from the chair and carried the plate into the kitchen. I. Mulbai felt as if he had been despised again. Being looked at by a little girl with that kind of helpless gaze, as if she had already seen through everything. Meg listened to Mulbai's arrogant conversation in the kitchen. He was speechless after being easily refuted by Amy, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up a little. This little girl is very talented. As expected of my daughter. As long as her poisonous tongue is casually developed, coupled with her cute appearance, she can completely refute people until they start doubting their lives and yet they can't get angry. This feeling is simply too good. Meg took the plate with a smile and put it aside as he looked at Amy and said, If you still want to eat, I'll make more for my portion and give you another small bowl. Father, you're so good to Amy. Amy looked up at Meg, her little face full of admiration. After waking up yesterday, Father seemed to have changed into a different person. He had changed so much. Mulby looked at the father and daughter in the kitchen from outside and was stunned. In a trance, he seemed to see the scene of a child standing in front of the stove and looking up at the man wielding the heavy hammer with adoration. After not seeing him for so many years, he didn't know how he was doing. He felt like he owed him too much. Go and sit outside. Father has to cook the fried rice for the customer first. Meg nodded with a smile. Okay. Amy responded obediently and happily went out of the kitchen. She climbed onto the high stool behind the counter and looked at Mulby with her chin in her hands. Grandpa Dwarf, don't be anxious. Your fried rice will be ready soon. Be good and wait for a while. Okay. Mulby came back to his senses and nodded. He looked at Amy with a rare smile. Customer, here's your fried rice. Meg placed the fried rice in front of Mulby with a smile. Okay. Mulby nodded and looked at the fried rice that was as exquisite as a work of art. He scooped up a big spoonful and put it into his mouth with a heart full of hope. The taste was as intoxicating as before, and as he swallowed the fried rice, that warm feeling rose up again, nourishing every part of his body. It's really effective. And it's even more effective than the intermediate recovery potion. Mulby's eyes were full of surprise. He didn't know if it was because he had already eaten one serving, but it had relieved enough of his muscle fatigue. He felt that eating the second serving not only relieved his fatigue, but also nourished the muscles that had been worn out over the years. Although the nourishment was very weak, those parts of his body that would hurt unbearably on rainy days felt exceptionally comfortable now, as if a pair of warm hands were gently massaging them. Chapter 18. Creak, with a soft sound, the door of the room was gently pushed open, and a figure sneaked in. He let out a long sigh of relief, stretched, and burped. While turning the automatic oil lamp by the door, he muttered, "Fortunately, I wasn't discovered. Otherwise, these guys would definitely go to Father and tell on me." "Those guys are very annoying, aren't they?" a voice asked. "They are. They're so annoying." Vivian chimed in before her expression stiffened. The oil lamp slowly lit up the room, and Vivian immediately turned to Michael with a panicked expression as she asked, "Father, why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be back very late today? If I hadn't come back, I wouldn't have been able to catch you, the kitten that ran out to steal food." Michael turned to Vivian with a serious expression. He was also feeling rather resigned at the sight of Vivian in men's clothes. "Who said that?" "I only went out to get some fresh air because it was too stuffy at home. I didn't steal food." Burp. Vivian looked up at the ceiling with a faint blush on her face. She had actually burped at such a critical juncture. "Remember to wipe your mouth clean before coming in next time. Otherwise, I can tell that you're stealing food even if you don't burp." Michael couldn't help but chuckle as he pointed at the corner of Vivian's mouth. Vivian wiped the corner of her mouth, and discovered that there was a speck of red oil on her hand. It appeared that she hadn't wiped her hand clean after eating the grilled fish. Her expression became even more awkward. It looked like she wasn't going to be able to fool her father tonight. She immediately sat down across from Michael, poured herself a glass of water, and downed it in one gulp. She then turned to Michael with a serious expression, and said, "Father, I didn't steal food for you. Father, I didn't go out today to steal food. I went out to investigate for you. After my investigation, I found that what Uncle Robert said this afternoon was completely true. That Mamie restaurant really does have super delicious food, and it's extremely popular. There's always a long line after it's sold out. How can a restaurant like that be removed from the Aiden Square food competition rankings after earning such a high ranking? There must be something wrong with the Catering Association. You should investigate this matter thoroughly. Otherwise, the Aiden Square food competition rankings are completely unfair. Oh. You went to that restaurant for a meal. Michael was a little surprised to hear that. Yes, I went to eat spicy grilled fish, and it was really, really delicious. How about I take you to eat it tomorrow? We can invite Mother as well. Vivian nodded with an expectant look in her eyes. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow. I have to receive a Beastman envoy at noon, and I have to mediate between the dwarves and demons at night. I don't have time to go. Michael shook his head with a serious expression as he said, besides, Master Adam said that you can't eat spicy food in your current condition, so you can only eat this spicy grilled fish once. You're not allowed to eat it again. Oh. Vivian looked at Michael's serious expression, and nodded reluctantly even though she was a little reluctant. Michael's expression also softened at the sight of Vivian's nod, and he asked with a concerned expression, Are your lower abdomen and legs still cold today? It's time for Master Adams to nourish you with his magic again. I came back early today to take you there, and at the same time, pay Master Adams a visit. Today. Vivian raised her leg before pressing down on her lower abdomen with an elated expression, and said, It doesn't hurt at all. I don't feel cold anymore, it's as if I've completely recovered. Really? Michael was a little skeptical, and he said in a meaningful voice, Vivian, the nourishment process is a little uncomfortable, but Master Adams's fire magic is the most powerful in Chaos City. Only when he nourishes you once a month can the cold be kept under control. Father, it really doesn't hurt or feel cold anymore. I still felt a little uncomfortable when I woke up this morning, and nighttime is usually the most uncomfortable time of the day, but I don't feel anything at all now. Could it be because of that spicy grilled fish I just ate? I felt warm all over when I ate it, and I sweated a lot. Now, I feel completely relaxed, and I don't feel any discomfort at all. I just want to take a bath. Vivian cut off Michael with an incredulous look on her face. Let me take a look at your hand. Michael grabbed Vivian's hand and placed his fingers on her wrist. He closed his eyes, and only after a while did he abruptly open his eyes with an incredulous look on his face as he said, A lot of the glacial energy has indeed disappeared. In particular, most of the glacial energy in your meridians has disappeared. In that case, Father, does that mean I'll be able to recover completely if I keep eating that spicy grilled fish? Vivian's expression lit up. She felt as if she had made an incredible discovery. Compared to drinking medicine, eating grilled fish every day was the best thing she could do. Michael released Vivian's hand, and didn't answer her question. Instead, he urged, Come with me to Master Adam's place right now, and let him see what's going on. Can I take a bath first? Vivian requested. All right, hurry up. I'll go tell your mother to eat first. Michael nodded before departing. Here's your tofu pudding. Yabamiya emerged with a bowl of sweet tofu pudding and a bowl of savory tofu pudding, and placed them in front of Warren and Tonis. I heard that the customers of this restaurant are arguing over whether to eat sweet or savory tofu pudding. It's just a bowl of tofu pudding, what's there to argue about? Tonis looked at the savory tofu pudding in front of him with a smile. You'll know once you try it. Warren also smiled, and the aroma of the tofu pudding wafting toward him made him swallow involuntarily. He had joined the food association mainly because he loved to eat. Back then, his goal had been very simple, he wanted to eat at all of the restaurants in the Aiden Square. Now, he had the power to decide what the customers ate in the Aiden Square and which restaurants would become popular. Never would he have thought that the Aiden Square food competition would change his life in such a way. It was completely beyond his expectations. Warren looked at the tofu pudding in front of him, and found that it was just like egg custard, except it was more springy. He dug into the tofu pudding that had been covered by the reddish-golden syrup with his spoon, and the incision was as soft and white as jade, but it was quickly covered by the thick syrup again. He slowly scooped up a spoonful of tofu pudding, and the tofu pudding wobbled in his spoon like an intricate piece of art. It looks and smells great, I hope it won't disappoint me. Warren put the tofu pudding into his mouth with an expectant look in his eyes. The tofu pudding melted almost as soon as it entered his mouth, and the syrup around it was so rich and sweet that it blended perfectly with the tofu pudding. He swallowed a mouthful of tofu pudding, but it didn't taste too sweet at all. Instead, there was a faint lingering aroma of tofu pudding in his mouth. Chapter 19. Meg stared blankly for a moment, but he quickly realized that Amy must have felt that she hadn't been of much help because she hadn't been as successful as him at the cashier counter. Putting down the bowl in his hand, Meg looked at Amy's small eyes and couldn't help but feel a little distressed. It seemed that the little girl was still not confident. Actually, in his eyes, it was already very good for the 4-year-old Amy to be able to do so much. Who said so? How could our Amy be useless? It's mostly because of Amy that we were able to sell 4 plates of fried rice today. Secondly, when we were at the cashier counter, the 4 plates of fried rice cost 2,400 copper coins. Amy calculated correctly, but Grandpa Mobai didn't have that many copper coins, so he could only use the more beautiful and valuable gold coins as a substitute. Meg looked into Amy's eyes and shook his head seriously. Really? Amy's eyes grew brighter and brighter as she listened to Meg's words, but she still wasn't confident. Of course it's true. Amy has never seen gold coins before. This is Father's fault, because Father didn't even earn a single gold coin before. If I have to say who's wrong, then it's that I didn't tell Amy that silver coins, gold coins, and dragon coins can be used to buy things just like copper coins. I should reflect on myself. I hope our little darling Amy can forgive me. Meg nodded with a self-blaming expression on his face. No, how can you blame Lord Father? Lord Father treats Xiaomi the best. Amy shook her head vigorously and lowered her eyes. She said with a little grievance, Teacher Luna taught me before, but so many copper coins turned into so few gold coins. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Besides, there were too many things to change, so, Meg's eyebrows trembled, and he almost couldn't hold back his laughter. Amy's explanation was really too cute, but looking at the little girl's timid eyes, he felt a little sad. The external environment had a great influence on a person's character, especially for people like Amy who were slowly shaping their 3 views and forming habits. Her previous life had been too poor, and the humans and elves despised half-elves, which made her feel a little inferior and lacking in self-confidence. Fortunately, Amy was still young, and this kind of mentality was just a budding bud. Meg believed that he could slowly help her adjust and become a confident little girl. In the future, I can't let Amy be mocked and looked down upon by others. I have to treat her like the apple of my eye and raise her into a happy little princess, Meg told himself in his mind. However, when it came to arithmetic, the standard of mathematics in this world was indeed worrying. It was even worse than the standard of foreign people in his previous life. Even adding and subtracting numbers with more than 2 digits took a long time. In this world where culture was not widespread, this was not a strange thing. But Meg suddenly had some ideas about how to build Amy's confidence. China was naturally one of the countries with the highest standard of mathematics on Earth, and it was the 9-9 multiplication table that made a great contribution. Meg reached out to rub Amy's hair, put the small bowl in front of her, and said with a smile, "Eat this bowl of fried rice first. After eating, Father will teach you a kind of arithmetic formula. After you learn it, you will be better than those students studying in chaos school, and it will be easier for you to collect money in the future." Really? Better than those big brothers and sisters? Amy's eyes lit up immediately, and she looked at Meg in disbelief. In her eyes, those big brothers and sisters who sat in the classroom and studied with Teacher Luna every day were super awesome. Of course it's true. When has father ever lied to you? Meg nodded. Amy nodded and said seriously, Father has never lied to Amy. Amy will learn seriously. Then she began to eat obediently. Meg looked at Amy, who was eating cutely, and picked up his spoon to eat as well. The 9-9 multiplication table was a divine weapon. If Amy mastered it, it would be easy for her to bully those children who were still counting with their fingers. The first step to boosting her confidence would start from here. After dinner, Mag cleaned up the dishes in the kitchen. He looked at the greasy plates in the sink, and didn't want to wash them. After a moment of hesitation, he asked the system in his mind, System, do you sell dishwashers? This system does not sell electrical appliances, the system replied. Just tell me, are you selling or not? I will pay. Meg pursed his lips. The system was silent for a moment, and then it gave a price in words, basic dishwasher. Can wash 5 plates and 10 spoons at a time. Price, 3 gold coins. This system is really greedy for money. It has no principles at all. Meg rolled his eyes. He had seen through the system's bottom line. However, the price was still acceptable. He said without hesitation, so cheap. Then I want one. Deduct the money from my credit limit first. Payment successful. Dishwasher in place. Another row of words floated by. Mag looked at the bright silver dishwasher on the stove, and his eyes lit up. This thing looked very high-tech. He opened the lid, and placed all the plates and spoons in the sink into it. He pressed the on button, and the lid opened automatically in less than a minute. The plates inside had already become shiny and new. Modern technology was really convenient. Meg put the bowls and spoons away with satisfaction. Amy stood at the kitchen door and looked at Meg expectantly. Father, what are we going to learn? The multiplication table. Amy, wait for me. I will go get a pen and paper. Today, I will try to memorize a few lines. He went upstairs to get a piece of paper and a pen, and then sat down at the table to write down the multiplication table in the form of a ladder. Thank you, boss, Mag said, and then went upstairs to get a piece of paper and a pen. The language of this world was naturally different from the language on Earth. However, the common language was similar to the Oracle bone script. The numbers were the same as the Arabic numerals. The development of history always had some surprising similarities. Meg had inherited the memory of his predecessor, so he had a complete grasp of this world's language. Father's handwriting is so beautiful. Amy was watching Meg write the multiplication table. She clapped her hands and praised him. She looked at Meg with admiration. She used to think that Teacher Luna's handwriting was the best, but her father's handwriting was even better than Teacher Luna's. It was as if they were carved. Meg was praised by Amy and looked at with admiration. When he was young, he was forced to practice writing for an hour every day. Suddenly, he felt that it was worth it. His good handwriting was finally appreciated by someone. He smiled and said, "Then when father has time, can he teach me how to write?" Chapter 20. Yes, because there are 9 rows and 9 columns, it's called the 9x9 multiplication table. Amy already has some foundation in addition and subtraction, so it shouldn't be too difficult for her to learn this. Meg looked at the neatly arranged stair-shaped multiplication table. Both the horizontal and vertical lines were neat and the handwriting was clear. He put down the pen with satisfaction and smiled. Then what's that little cross in the middle? Amy asked, pointing at the X in confusion. This is a multiplication sign. It has the same meaning as multiplication, so it's simpler to express it this way. Meg explained with a smile. He asked Amy to sit down on the chair next to him and pushed the multiplication table closer to her. Only Father knows this multiplication table. You only need to remember 81 items, and then learn the decimal system well. Then you can solve most of the math you need in your life. Wow, Father is so awesome. Last time, Teacher Luna told me that if I want to memorize the multiplication table, I need to memorize 1770 items, but I only memorized about 100. Amy looked at Meg with admiration. She didn't expect that not only was her father's handwriting beautiful, but he also knew simpler math than Teacher Luna. He was really amazing. Although he was standing on the shoulders of the ancient Chinese sages, and it wasn't good to show off, Meg felt really good to be admired by his daughter. He smiled and pointed to the first item on the upper left corner and said, "Then let's learn the first column today." The numbers on both sides of the multiplication sign are the multiplication signs, and the product is the result of the calculation. Meg explained the structure of the multiplication table to Amy in detail. Under Teacher Luna's teaching, Amy did have some foundation in mathematics. At least she understood the meaning of each number and had a certain concept of addition and subtraction. However, there was no decimal system in mathematics in this world, so he spent a lot of time slowly teaching Amy the meaning of the decimal system. What comforted Meg the most was that Amy didn't doubt anything he said. Even if it completely overturned what Teacher Luna had taught her, she still chose to listen to him unconditionally and quickly accepted the concept of decimal multiplication. 1 is 1, 1 2 is 2. Amy recited after Meg. The little girl's memory was pretty good. After reciting after Meg a dozen times, she remembered the first column. Meg struck while the iron was hot. He recited the entire multiplication table with her twice to give her a general feeling. "But Father, what's the use of memorizing this?" Amy looked up at Meg in confusion after reciting it a few times. "Oh, it's very useful." Meg smiled and pointed at the multiplication table. "Look, a plate of Yangzhou fried rice costs 600 copper coins, which is 6 gold coins. Grandpa Mabai ate 4 plates just now, so it's 4 times 6 is equal to 24. You can know the result directly without having to count them with your fingers. Don't you think it's very convenient? It's really 24 gold coins." Amy's eyes lit up. She had spent a lot of time calculating the 2,400 copper coins in her mind, but her father had just used the multiplication table to calculate it. This multiplication table was so useful. She said enthusiastically, "Father, I want to learn. I want to learn this multiplication table. If Amy learns it well, then she can really help Father." "Okay, then we'll learn 3 columns today, and we'll learn the rest tomorrow." Meg nodded with a smile. The most important thing in learning was initiative and enthusiasm, and Amy didn't lack either. He believed that she would master the multiplication table very soon. Noon passed as Amy memorized the multiplication table. Except for Mabai, no other customer came into the restaurant, which showed how deserted this corner of the Aden Square was. But after selling 4 plates of fried rice, Meg was relieved. At least he didn't have to worry that the taste of Yangzhou fried rice was not suitable for people in this world. And judging from Mabai's reaction, the effect of the fried rice to relieve muscle fatigue was also effective for him. Maybe he would be a regular customer in the future. This was good news. 342, 355, 36, 36, 36 is too difficult. Amy looked up at Meg with a sad face. This was the 5th time she couldn't memorize the multiplication table. Tears were rolling in her eyes. "Okay, then you can memorize up to 355 today. Amy is already very good. Not many children can finish the first column on their first try. You can memorize the rest tomorrow. It's best to do it step by step." Meg put away the multiplication table and rubbed Amy's hair with a smile. This reminded him of a video he had seen in his previous life where a little girl had cried while memorizing the multiplication table. Sure enough, they were of the same age and had the same troubles. Really? Amy, who thought she was going to be scolded, heard Meg's words, and her eyes lit up again. Father actually said that she was better than the other children. Of course it's true. When have I ever lied to you? Meg looked into Amy's eyes and nodded seriously. Okay, Father wouldn't lie to me. I'll memorize the rest tomorrow. Amy nodded, and a bright smile appeared on her face. She was more confident now. Meg put the multiplication table behind the counter. It was past mealtime, and no one would come to eat. Looking at Amy's messy hair, he walked to the door, flipped the "Open for Business" sign, and locked the door from the inside. Then he took Amy's little hand and said, "Let's go. Father will wash your hair and bathe you. You'll become a clean little fairy. Do we need to boil some hot water and bring a wooden bucket?" Amy looked up at Meg and asked. "No, there's a water pipe upstairs that directly pours out hot water. There's also a bathtub." Meg smiled and shook his head. "Is it like the faucet in the kitchen?" Amy asked in surprise. The thing that her father called a faucet was so magical. Clear and sweet water would come out just by turning it. It was like magic. "Yes, it is." Meg nodded and held her little hand as they went upstairs. Amy had only just begun to understand this world, so she was only curious about the modern things at home and did not feel too conflicted. Amy, who was seeing a bathtub for the first time, quickly got used to it. She sat in the bathtub and flopped her feet, holding the white foam in her hands and giggling. She looked at Meg and said happily, "Father, this bathtub is so fun. And these bubbles smell so good. It smells so good. Well, this is shower gel for bathing. Now I have shampoo in my hands. It's used to wash your hair. After washing it, your hair will be very clean and fragrant," Meg said with a smile. He clumsily rubbed the shampoo on Amy's hair with his hands and said softly, "Be good and close your eyes. It'll be very uncomfortable if the shampoo gets into your eyes." Okay, Amy wants to become as fragrant as Father. Amy obediently closed her eyes. Meg gently rubbed Amy's hair. Although his movements were a little clumsy, he was very meticulous. He carefully separated the clumps of hair that were stuck together. In fact, Amy's hair was very smooth. Chapter 21. Please note that the system is not a shopping mall. Clothing is not provided, the system replied coldly. I'll pay for it. How much is a set of pajamas? 50 copper coins. 100 copper coins. Even if it's 2 gold coins, I'll still accept it, Meg said calmly as he looked at the remaining 616 copper coins. The system was silent for a while, then silently gave him a quote, "A set of children's pajamas is 2 gold coins. A set of adult pajamas is 3 gold coins. A set of children's clothes is 3 gold coins. A set of chef's clothes is 3 gold coins. You can choose the color and style. Then I'd better get a set of children's pajamas and a set of chef's clothes first." Meg looked at Amy, who had just finished her bath and was starting to feel sleepy. The price wasn't too expensive, but the most important thing right now was to use the money he had on him to buy ingredients and complete the mission. Looking at the different styles and colors of children's pajamas that suddenly appeared in his mind, Meg was a little dazzled. He looked at Amy and asked, "What kind of pajamas do you want, Amy? What color do you like?" Amy likes the purple one. It would be great if there was a little bear on it, Amy said to Mag expectantly after thinking about it seriously. Father's magic was so powerful. The house and clothes he conjured were so beautiful, so she was also full of expectations for new clothes. Then it's this one. Mag's gaze landed on a purple nightgown, and his eyes lit up. It was a furry one-piece nightgown, and there were 2 cute bear ears on the hood. There was also an adorable brown bear in front of it. I'll go get the clothes for Amy. Meg looked at the system's notification that the clothes were already in the wardrobe. He told Amy and walked into the room to open the wardrobe. A set of cute bear pajamas and a brand new chef's clothes were already in the wardrobe. Meg folded the chef's clothes and placed them on the bed. He took the pajamas into the bathroom and looked at Amy with a smile. Do you like it? Wow, what a beautiful dress. Amy, who was wrapped in a towel, looked at the purple teddy bear costume in Meg's hands as he unfolded it. She nodded happily and said, yes, Amy loves purple the most. It's so furry, and I'll turn into a teddy bear when I put it on. Amy loves it so much. Father, you're the best. Seeing how happy Amy was, Meg also felt very happy. He took a dry towel from the side and said, then I'll help Amy dry her hair. You can change into your pajamas and take a nap. Okay. Amy nodded and poked her head over. She couldn't wait to put on her new clothes. Meg carefully dried Amy's hair with a dry towel and dried it with a hairdryer before helping her change into a new set of clothes. So soft and comfortable. Amy raised her hand and rubbed her face with her furry sleeve. Her eyes narrowed, and her little face was full of bliss. Meg looked at Amy. The furry purple one-piece pajamas made Amy look like a cute purple teddy bear. It made her skin look even fairer. Her silvery hair was draped over her shoulders and back, and her cute little pointy ears were white and sparkling. She was simply the perfect combination of human and elf. Let Father carry you and take a look at our teddy bear Amy. Meg reached out and pulled Amy's hat over her head. Then, he picked her up and held her in front of the mirror. Wow, the teddy bear is here. I'm going to eat you. Amy looked at herself in the mirror as a teddy bear. She opened her mouth wide and waved her hands at Meg. Teddy bear, please spare me. Teddy bear, please spare me. Meg smiled and cooperated by taking a step back. It's okay. Don't be afraid. I can't bear to eat Father. Amy opened her arms and hugged Meg's face. She kissed him on the cheek and stroked his hair to comfort him. Okay, don't be afraid. Our Amy has become fragrant. It's time to take a nap. Meg held back his laughter. The little girl was really cute. He sniffed her nose, carried Amy into the bedroom, and gently placed her on the bed. Amy can't sleep. Father, can you tell Amy a story? Amy lay on the bed, grabbed one of Meg's fingers, and shook her head. Okay, then I'll tell Amy the story of the ugly duckling. Meg nodded. He pulled a stool from the side and sat down beside the little bed. Okay, Amy wants to hear it. Amy nodded. In a distant and beautiful countryside, a mother duck was lying on a nest of duck eggs and hatching ducklings. Meg began to tell the story of the ugly duckling in a slightly low voice. Almost every child had heard of this fairy tale, and Meg had chosen this story for a reason. Amy's lack of confidence was partly because she felt that she was different from other human children and elves. Therefore, she was sometimes bullied and mocked, just like the little swan that was born in a flock of ducks. Therefore, he wanted to use this story to tell her that she was actually not strange, but special, and that she would be more outstanding than them in the future. Of course, with him around now, those storms of the outside world would definitely not fall on her. An ugly duckling broke out of its shell from a flock of ducks. Because it looked different from the ducks and all the animals around it, it was despised. She was chased and bitten by ducks, pecked by chickens, taunted by cats, and kicked by a female servant who was in charge of the chicken farm. She had no choice but to follow the river and leave that place alone. She endured a cold winter and almost died at the hands of a farmer's wife. In the end, the warm spring finally arrived. She looked at the white swans flying over from afar and flapped her wings desperately. Only then did she realize that she was a beautiful and noble white swan that could fly into the sky and be loved by others. Meg told the story in a low and slightly magnetic voice. Amy was completely immersed in the story. She clenched her little fists tightly as if she were worried and nervous about the ugly duckling. She heaved a sigh of relief after hearing that it had escaped, but she was soon nervous again because of the new danger. In the end, the ugly duckling finally turned into a beautiful white swan and flew into the sky. Only when it found its true companion did a happy smile appear on its face. "So, Father, is Amy an ugly duckling? Will I really become a white swan when I grow up?" Amy looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. "No, Amy is a beautiful little swan now. When she grows up, she will become an even more noble and beautiful white swan." Meg shook his head with a smile. He gently stroked Amy's hair with his other hand, and gently said, "Furthermore, as long as Father is here, no one can hurt Amy." "Yes, I believe in Father." Amy looked into Meg's eyes and nodded with full trust. After a moment of hesitation, she said, "Amy has a small request." Meg looked at her with an encouraging gaze. "Can we raise an ugly duckling?" Amy asked softly. "Does Amy like white swans?" Meg was a little surprised. Little swans were not easy to get, but if Amy wanted to raise one, he could think of a way.